Okay, so I guess we can more or less start. Let me know if you guys can hear me clearly. If we can jump straight in. Um, this is very impromptu live stream. I literally set this up about like 25 minutes ago. So yeah, okay, people can hear me. So I will switch over to this. Hello, everyone. And yes, we have the preview pages. I have a pinned comment in the chat. Basically, it's on Amazon.com, so American Amazon. If you go to the page, and then you can click read sample down here just underneath the cover. It might be different on mobile if you're doing that, but if you click this, it will lead you to this sample. Seems to be the first 3 chapters, but also the last chapter, so spoilers on that. Don't scroll down too much or you'll jump from like chapter 3 straight to the epilogue. I'm not going to be going over the epilogue here on stream just because it's like skipping half the book, and the context is a bit kind of weird. So I'll just mention that, hey, that epilogue is there if you want to look ahead. Thankfully, the epilogues tend to be done in sort of a weird way where they kind of maybe don't directly spoil the ending of the book, but it's just an unusual way the previews are done. Again, we went from being nowhere on this book to now we have the description and we have preview pages, and it's actually like the earliest we've ever had preview pages. Like, I can't remember the last time we had preview pages like this far out, given that it's like right at the end of December. Like, we're getting them nearly 2 full months before release, so it's kind of crazy what's happened here. So yeah, we'll start off with the description. Now, I will straight away note that there is immediately an error, and it looks like, based on this, because this is a preview of the actual physical book rather than the ebook, it looks like it made it to print. The second paragraph here, starting with this, when Sozin requests the new Avatar's aid in preventing the Earth Kingdom from claiming a remote Fire Nation island, it doesn't surprise Roku that Sister Disha advises him to decline. Where have we heard that before? Well, it's exactly the same here. Where is it here? Yeah. When Sozin requests and stuff like that. So, pretty bad editing error there, I guess, where I guess they copy and pasted the format of the inner kind of flap and just left that in there. So I don't know, because I don't think the listing is the description is up on the actual website. Yeah, they still have the placeholder here. So it's only because this is the physical version that it's here. So that's odd. That's like, ooh, did they rush this out the door or something like that? What's going on here? So I'm wondering, like, is there meant to be a completely different paragraph of text there that we're missing? So like the description is kind of wrong until we get the updated listings elsewhere. Or is somehow this also still meant to be relevant? Like, does the same line of text apply? It's weird. But let's go through it here. So the tagline here is, there are as many paths to full avatarhood as there are avatars. That makes sense. That's the entire premise of the series, is that each avatar has a very different journey. So this is Roku's journey, which is sort of meant to be the more standard one, which is kind of actually an oddity among the avatars that we've properly had stories about. So it's kind of funny that the normal way is actually the mystery to us almost. 3 years after the mess on Lombok Island, Roku has finally mastered airbending and is on track to become the avatar the world needs. But when he encounters a mysterious illness on his way to Agna Kel'a, he delays his journey and the next phase of his training to prevent the situation from worsening. Then we have the sort of the book 1 partial description, which may or not be relevant to what actually happens in this book because it is word for word the same thing. But anyway, as Roku ventures deeper into the north and nearer to danger, he soon realizes there's more to the malady than meets the eye. With the assistance of his good friend Gyatso, a gifted waterbender named Makituk, and others near and far, including from his past, Roku races to contain the crisis before the disease can ravage the north, ... and beyond. The suspenseful following up to Reckoning of Roku delves into the Avatar's continued efforts to trust himself and to restore peace to a world hovering on the brink of catastrophe. So that is the way, of course, we know the Roku era to be from like the RPG material on the Roku era. We delved into it a little bit in the first book, but not really. It wasn't like super focused on the politics, so we maybe expect this book to go into a little bit more detail on that front. But yeah, so we get the reveal of who the friend who's joining them on the journey is. It's going to be Makituk, who, again, if you've read the RPG, you do have at least a little bit of context for who Makituk is. But yeah, otherwise it is mostly just what we know from before. He's going to the northern capital, Agnakela. There is some sort of a mysterious disease. I think the fact that Makituk is involved speaks to the idea it's probably spiritual in nature to a certain degree, or at least he will need some spiritual guidance along the way, and Makituk is going to be able to help Roku with that. Though interestingly, there is a little bit of a time gap between where we are now and the start of the RPG material. So that's kind of an interesting one that's worth going into. Otherwise, like, I don't think there's too much to really talk about directly from the description. He delays his journey. We encounter so he's on the way to Agnakela, but doesn't get there. He encounters the disease before he gets there. So that, I suppose, prevents us probably from getting to the whole Talkukak situation, where like maybe we'll meet him later on in the book, but like it's not going to happen immediately. So yeah, Makituk, from the description here, you can see here, Makituk is a tall woman with broad, warm smile. A powerful bender of the Northern Water Tribe, Makituk has always felt isolated from others, more in touch with the spirits than people. From a young age, she knew she was assigned the wrong gender at birth. When her family rejected her need to live openly as her true identity, she found solace in interacting with spirits who understood her true self. As the spirits have become agitated, Makituk has taken it upon herself to develop her rare water-bending ability to calm spirits thrown out of balance. So that's spirit bending. She is a spirit bender. She lives near the edge of a large spirit forest and does her best to keep dark spirits from attacking Agnakela and other settlements. She's happy. This is more of an RPG kind of related thing, but happy for assistance from heroes looking for ways to maintain balance with the spirits and teach any worthy waterbender how to heal others regardless of their gender. So there's a few very interesting avenues that we can tackle with Makituk as a character. So straight away, there is that kind of sort of, I guess, early struggle with her gender issue kind of among her family, which is very interesting for the Water Tribe, which is usually the very communal nation, that she was kind of rejected in this sense. But it speaks to, on the way to the capital, this is how Roku, I guess, is going to come across this character kind of living out by herself, more interacting with the spirits. So it speaks to the idea, I guess, we are going to get to interact with spirits a decent amount here, which is kind of very interesting. Because again, we are in an era of like relative peace. So like the spirits kind of can be there, but of course, spirit agitation, this is probably the disease is probably spiritual in nature, and it makes sense that spirit bending, it's a type of healing to a certain degree. That's kind of what we're going to get into there. So really cool reference, super cool to see this. I thought it was definitely a possibility. It was hard to fully call it from the basic information that we had before, so it's cool to have that. But yeah, let's jump into this here. Let's go through the basic contents kind of pages here. Is there anything to note really here? Not really. That's all fine. For the healers and the healing, that's kind of interesting given what we're dealing with here, the Water Tribe. Prologue. So we do have a prologue. Let me put the first book down. The frigid wind howled like a vengeful spirit as it rolled off the mountains and whipped across the frozen lake. The hunters, two specks in a vast expanse of white, lowered their hooded heads and shielded their faces against the biting cold. Their progress was slow and would only get slower. Not only were their harpoons and hearts heavy, but ahead lay the dense white haze of an approaching blizzard swallowing the horizon. "We should return to camp," Asu called out to his father after the gust relented long enough to raise his face. Asu's father, a towering caribou bear of a man named Karsok. Let me try and get my water tribe pronunciation correct here. So the Q is like, it's like a K, so it's ok. So but the Q at the start, it's either Karsok or Quarsok. Either way, we'll get it on the audiobook, I guess. Let the wind carry his son's words away. It was an oblivious enough truth under normal circumstances, but these were not normal circumstances. Their quarry had been missing from the usual migration routes throughout the summer, and they could not return empty-handed yet again. In another era, Karsok and Asu would have simply adapted and followed the animals' shifting movements, taking their tribe with them. However, their family, like many in the north, had moved to the capital years ago. So they were now beholden to the trading companies who told them when and where to hunt, companies who valued efficiency over tradition, companies quick to sever services. So, okay, that's interesting. So I guess we're maybe getting to the idea of just certain advancements in the world. Maybe this is the first teases of the kind of spirit disease issues affecting like animal migrations and people doing their hunting. But of course, the companies just existing is affecting the traditional values. And we know how important tradition is to the north, obviously. So father and son resumed prodding at the ice buried beneath the snow with the tips of their harpoons, searching for one of the smaller circular openings through which the turtle seals took their breaths. They whistled to keep track of each other and snuck glances at the horizon to follow the storm's approach. Time and time again, their harpoons struck only solid ice. The wind picked up, the snow arrived. When Asu next raised his eyes, the white had swallowed not only the mountains in the distance, but also Karsok. Asu listened until he caught the faint sound of his father's whistle, then clenched his jaw, tightened his grip on his harpoon, and turned his attention back to the task at hand. A few taps later, Asu's breath hitched as the pole pushed through the snow and splashed into the water. He prodded at the spot a few more times to be certain, and then dug a hole until he uncovered a hole in the ice the size of a fist. So small, an immeasurably improbable discovery. His chapped lips cracked as he broke out in a wide grin. Surely it was more than luck. Fate had guided his hand and would soon deliver a turtle seal with enough meat to quiet the company's concerns about his skills. So the company really getting involved in the hunting to the point where they're like doubting the skills of one of the hunters. That's interesting. Asu let out a long piercing whistle to signal his find, and Karsok trudged through the deepening snow with a pride glimmering in his eyes. Asu remained stoic even as his heart soared. His father had always taught him that humility is the companion of true strength. So that's referencing, of course, I guess the show, the Iroh line a bit, so that's kind of cool. Wordlessly, they took up positions on either side of the breathing hole, raised their harpoons, and waited for a whiskered snout to break the water surface, and waited. The wind whistled, the snow whirled, ice creaked and groaned in the distance. The cold stung Asu's face, his muscles began to tremble, and his focus flickered. He fought the urge to break his stance and shake out his limbs, for Karsok had taught him that patience was the difference between weakness and strength, between failure and success, between death and survival. But he did not have to wait much longer. A turtle seal burst through the breathing hole, slammed into Karsok, and knocked him onto his back in the snow. The creature pinned the hunter down and tore into him as his screams shattered the quiet. Heart pounding and eyes wide, Asu hurled his harpoon, but it glanced harmlessly off the turtle seal's hard shell. The creature whipped around, black eyes targeting Asu as it bared bloody, serrated teeth. Its slick skin was mottled with with purple bruises, and it was foaming at the mouth. So there's the sickness, I guess, here. Asu froze. This shouldn't be happening. Turtle seals aren't feral like Arctic wolves. They can't break through the ice like lion orcas. They don't maul humans like polar bear dogs. So that's really cool there, because of course like Naga is the only example of like a nice polar bear dog we really have. So it's always fun to get that reference of like, oh yeah, polar bear dogs are like incredibly dangerous in the wild and mauling humans. I think they even referenced that in Beast of the Four Nations. Yet, a dozen paces away was his father, groaning and writhing weakly in the snow, trapped beneath just such a creature, which was now letting out a barking, gargled snarls. It slithered off Karsok's body and prowled slowly towards Asu, dragging itself forward on its front flippers with a twitchy, erratic movements. This is actually pretty nice. The atmosphere is pretty nice here, just getting across that idea. It's kind of reminiscent of ATLA in a way. It's like two family members kind of out in the kind of wilderness, like doing some kind of hunting, kind of just exploring, and then the inciting incident happens. Like, they haven't found the avatar here, but you know, I guess they're coming across the disease for the first time, which is interesting. Asu swallowed and stood his ground. He wasn't a waterbender, but he had a knife sheathed at his waist beneath his parka. Slowly he began to reach for it as the turtle seal continued its menacing approach. The beast was 5 or 6 paces away by the time Asu's mate was under his parka. It was 2 or 3 away by the time his trembling gloved hand grasped the knife's hilt. Asu was about to unsheath the blade when the turtle seal faltered and broke eye contact. It let out several choking coughs, stumbled forward a few more paces, then collapsed into the snow. Its chest rose and fell with wheezing breaths as the fight and light drained away. Silence returned. Asu exhaled. He had no idea what had happened to the creature, but he didn't care. He rushed past it and dove to his father's side. "Father," he cried. Karsok's face was pale, his body was ravaged, and he was no longer moving, but his eyes fluttered open at the sound of his son's voice as thick flakes fell upon him. He was alive, but for how much longer? Whoa, this is definitely pretty intense here. His father on the verge of death here, theoretically, so we'll see what happens here. Panic thrummed through Asu. What to do now? Would it be safe to move Karsok? Asu didn't have a choice. He lifted his gaze to find himself enveloped in a swirling world of white. The blizzard, which he'd forgotten in the chaos of the attack, was now fully upon them. Would he be able to find their camp in this? And if so, where was the nearest outpost that might have a healer? So, they need a healer. He was about to turn his attention back to his father when a figure began to emerge from the snow in the middle distance. A person, or a hallucination. After all, who would be all the way out here in the middle of a storm? I'm guessing this is Makituk, but we'll see. A third possibility entered his mind as the figure grew clearer. He had grown up hearing stories of a human-shaped spirit who helped those lost on the ice find their way to safety. Perhaps this was that spirit. "Help us, please," Asu called in case he was not imagining things. "My father's badly hurt." The person, or spirit, or hallucination, said nothing but continued to approach. Soon Asu could make out the silhouette of a tribesman in winter furs. No, a tribeswoman, judging by the parka's longer, curved hemline. Her hood was up and drawn tight, so he couldn't see her full face. She stopped and knelt next to the turtle seal. She poked and prodded at the body, turned it over, and leaned closer. Her shoulders sagged, and she let out what sounded like a disappointed scoff, although Asu couldn't imagine why. "Please," he called again, frustrated by her lack of urgency. "We need your help." The tribeswoman hesitated for a moment, stood, then resumed walking towards him, still at an unhurried pace. Asu glanced down at his father, whose eyes had closed. He shook the man as he urged him to wake up, but Karsok remained unresponsive. A lump formed in Asu's throat as his heart began to break. He looked up to find the woman standing over them. She was tall, with a strong jaw and dark braided hair peeking out from behind her hood, which still shrouded her eyes. It finally worked. Asu heard the woman mutter to herself as she examined Karsok's mutilated body, but not for long enough. Interesting. It finally worked, but not for long enough. Please, Asu begged, ignoring her strange comments. Whoever you are. Atka, the tribeswoman interrupted unexpectedly. Okay, Atka, Asu repeated. Help him, please. But the woman who called herself Atka shook her head. I'm not here to help, she said, her words as frigid as the water churning unseen below the buried ice. With that, Atka turned and walked away. Asu continued calling after her, but the wailing wind drowned out his curses and cries for help as she vanished through the veil of swirling snow. So, interesting. So, obviously, like, the name Makituk didn't necessarily come up there. So, are we trying to get across the idea of, like, I guess, Makituk, like, maybe original name, or, like, that, something like that, I don't know. Because, I don't know, like, is the interpretation here that was definitely Makituk, or, I don't know, could this be someone else in all of this? Everything else seems to, I think, point towards that overall. So yeah, very mysterious here. It finally worked, but not for long enough. Now, the only thing that definitely makes me think that this might not be Makituk is just that the implication there is almost that this is maybe the person who's causing the disease. As in, oh, I made this animal go like feral and violent, but it only lasted a few minutes. So, and again, not here to help. I think Makituk would help. So, this is a different character, is, I guess, the idea here. Still, very, very interesting overall. What exactly that could be as well. Now, obviously, this could go heavy into spirit bending, because we know there is dark spirit bending. What was the description earlier on of the turtle seal? Where was it? Yeah, here. Yeah, its slick skin was mottled with purple bruises and foaming at the mouth. So, purple bruises. Purple definitely goes like dark spirity to me. So, but then it's bruises, so it seems very physical based. That's interesting. I don't think we know stuff about, like, what happens necessarily, I suppose, when spirits go into animals, which could be another way to facilitate something like this happening. Where, like, their body also wouldn't be able to contain that much energy, and it would cause issues, while also probably having them freak out. Definitely fascinating to see how they go about doing this, because if a disease plot in Avatar, you typically think maybe has to be somewhat spiritual in nature, so spirit bending could come up. Otherwise, you're more going down the scientific road, which is maybe not something we overly think about when it comes to Avatar that much. So that's interesting, certainly. But I kind of like the idea that there's almost the setup here of, like, good and bad spirit bender out in the Water Tribe wilderness, and the idea of, like, how do we defeat this like almost Unalaq-esque character to a certain degree, who's maybe just outwardly more like villainous in terms of some of the stuff kind of happening here, compared to, I guess, Makituk, who's going to be the good character who is kind of spiritual in nature. Definitely exciting stuff from the prologue. It's very mysterious. Like, the atmosphere I thought was got across very well there, in terms of just presenting Water Tribe stuff, which we always like to see, because the novels have been quite heavily focused on stuff. Try to see if you can check the Google Books preview as well. Okay, I'll definitely search that up later when I get through the chapters that we have here, so we might have a few more to go through. But yeah, here's the first, I suppose, proper chapter of the book. the sharpest scythe. Roku was ready, but he hesitated at the threshold. The sense that he was forgetting something nagged at him, so he turned around to examine the small room one final time. There wasn't much to forget, though. The prince's crown sat atop his head, his fire bamboo staff was in hand, and his satchel was slung across his body. He had no other possessions, and the simple furnishings within the room all belonged to the Southern Air Temple. Everything else he'd need for his journey had already been packed on Lola's saddle. Roku's lingering gaze shifted to the open window. It was a clear morning. Golden light poured over the surrounding mountaintops, making the temple's ivory towers glow and its blue spires gleam. A sky bison soared past, chased by a scattering of flying lemurs and gliding airbenders. He wasn't forgetting anything. He was missing something. He wasn't forgetting anything. He was missing something. This place before he'd even left. This life, these people. Abbot Rabten and his absent-minded wonder. Sister Disha and her patient wisdom. Gyatso and his gentle sarcasm. The last time he'd left a place he'd called home, he'd been forced to part with a city and a life and a friend. He'd never thought he'd leave to confront a destiny he'd never asked for and never wanted. He had felt like something was being ripped away. Now he felt more than the seasons were simply shifting. Even so, one could miss summer's warmth as they welcomed autumn's chill and changing leaves. Because after 3 years, Roku was done here. 3 years of meditation sessions and breathing exercises and philosophy lessons, of chores and relief missions, of meatless meals, of riding sky bison and sailing gliders, of learning to shift fluidly between spiraling forms to push and pull and shape and guide the air until intention became instinct and his own flowing energy became an extension of the wind. In other words, he had finally mastered airbending. A breeze stirred behind Roku, pulling his attention back indoors. He turned to find Sister Disha, a petite air nun with the blue arrow tattooed over her bald scalp. When Roku had first met his airbending master, he'd stood a full head taller than her. Now it was closer to 2. She entered, hands clasped at her back. Her eyes wandered around the room as his had. I travelled to Agna Kel-A a few times when I was Avatar Kyoshi's companion, she said. Your lodgings in the Northern Water Tribe's capital will be much closer to what you're accustomed to as a Fire Nation noble. But how's the view? Roku asked. Icy, she said, especially in the dead of winter. Are you sure you wouldn't rather wait to depart so soon, so you arrive in spring? As much as you've learned from us, regulating your body temperature like an air nomad can't be thought. Besides, my affairs at the Eastern Air Temple should be concluded by then, and I'll be able to accompany you north. Roku shook his head. It's time. So, already some cool stuff there. We always love the reference to the past avatars, and the fact that Disha was Kyoshi's kind of one of her last companions is super, super notable. And so, yeah, we're referencing the idea of each of the nations kind of seem to have, I guess, a quote-unquote residence for the avatar when they're doing their training. And we're talking about where he's heading to next, training waterbending in the north, in Agna Kel-A. So really cool here, this nice sense of like, okay, they're going to be saying goodbye to each other for a little while. Roku has actually grown to super love his time here at the Air Temple. And now he's moving on again, but he's kind of a bit more used to it now because he has accepted he is the Avatar, which is pretty nice. So yeah, it's time. That it is, Sister Disha conceded. You were ready for your airbending trials months ago when Gyatso underwent his. Roku wasn't so sure that was true. Can I tell Gyatso you said that? Maybe he'll stop bragging about how he beat me to it. If you must, she smiled sadly. Anyway, it was a stroke of good fortune that the royal family's invitation arrived when it did. Now the two of you will get to say a long goodbye without this old woman tagging along. I suppose so. Roku matched her smile with a sad one of his own. Gyatso had been tasked with establishing the Fire and Air Center for Learning, the first site in the capital where the air nomads would be able to properly share their teachings with Fire nationals. So after Roku had received Lord Taiso's summons, he had decided he would escort Gyatso to the Fire Nation before heading north alone. So yeah, this is pretty cool here, referencing the royal family's invitation. So I'm assuming the context there is that they're talking about the Northern Water Tribe royal family, which is actually something I really want to know the details of, in terms of like when we maybe get there, will they go into the details on that? Because like we still have a lot of questions about like the whole Yue Arnuk situation and kind of what happened after that, and like the transition between Arnuk and like Tonraq and Unalaq's father, and that whole situation, like what's going on here. Will we get that? I'm not sure, but cool. Fire Lord Taiso, of course, still in place as the Fire Lord. The timing on this, I think we technically do know the timing on this, in that like Sozin will become Fire Lord in a couple more years, but not quite yet. So that's that. He decided he would escort Gyatso to the Fire Nation before heading north alone. Okay, so Gyatso's going to end up coming along with him. We're talking about the Fire and Air Center for Learning. Okay, that's cool. That makes sense. He's being put in charge of that. Just don't let him take you too far off course trying to find an unagi to surf. That's nice. Sister Disha cautioned, shaking her head. It's all he's been talking about these last few days. I'll try my best, Roku said, but I'm only the avatar. It's important to know one's limitations. Roku chuckled. Thank you for not giving up on me, sister. The Air Nun nodded. They both remembered Roku's first few weeks at the Southern Air Temple, when he'd masked his insecurities with arrogance and impatience. In direct defiance of her instructions, he'd even snuck away with Gyatso to one of the Fire Nation's outer islands, now known as Lombok Island, that Prince Sozin claimed the Earth Kingdom had been trying to steal. The truth of the situation turned out to be much more convoluted, and Roku wouldn't have made it off that island alive without the help of Gyatso and an islander named Malaya, who wasn't so lucky herself. So the first Malaya reference in the book, I'm very interested to see, in terms of the Gyatso development, like how much we maybe focus on that, and maybe get to learn bits and pieces about her just in reflection, but we'll see. After the ordeal, he'd expected anger and punishment in the face of his disobedience. He had even worried that Sister Disha might abandon him as a student altogether. However, instruction through punishment was the way of the Fire Nation, not the way of the Air Nomads. Sister Disha was far more relieved than upset when she found Gyatso and Roku. And when they'd returned to the Southern Air Temple, she and the other elders ensured Roku and Gyatso had the space to meditate, discuss, reflect on, and process all they'd experienced. The ways their actions had helped, the ways their actions had hurt, the regret, the guilt, the shame, the grief. Roku had come to understand how he'd been shaped by his past, but did not need to be bound by it. A far more valuable lesson than any bending technique. So that's really cool to see their approach to kind of handling that situation there. That feels very Air Nomad. Roku's chest tightened at the thought of leaving behind such guidance. He dropped his gaze and adjusted his grip on his staff. What if I can't do it? He said quietly. Do what? Sister Disha asked in the familiar tone she used when she wanted him to speak something aloud for himself. Roku sighed. Be the avatar the world needs. Sister Disha wandered over to the window. Again, she met his question with one of her own. What feeds that fear? Interesting. Roku walked up next to her. He breathed in a fresh mountain air and the smoke of the morning's cooking fires as he tried to find the words to articulate the tangled worries that knotted in his gut. I don't know. You're always advising us to look inward. It's one thing to meditate on that peacefully here at the temple, but I worry I can't do it out there. What if I face a difficult decision and looking inward doesn't help me figure out the right thing to do? Sister Disha turned to Roku, like on Lombok Island. He nodded, thinking of what happened to Malaya, as well as how he'd taken the life of that murderous waterbender, Chief Ulo. You were untrained and unwilling to listen, she said. You're a different person now. Roku wasn't so sure about that. He'd learned much from the air nomads over the last few years, but could someone ever truly change their innermost nature? I'd be more worried, Sister Disha continued, if you did not have this concern. It's an important matter. As the Avatar, many regard you as a tool to fix their problems, a weapon to slay their enemies. They'll entreat your assistance as if reaching for the heaviest hammer or the sharpest scythe. And always they will assure you that what they need you to do is right, that it is good. But remember what you've learned here, Avatar Roku. Actions, like people, are neither right nor wrong. They are neither good nor bad. Those are words often twisted to justify or obscure or absolve. Your true work is discerning the course of action that will bring harmony. That's really interesting, that line. Just as overall kind of like core advice, especially with dealing with the idea of like, okay, as a fire avatar, you go from this, you get this kind of crazy shift from the way the Fire Nation is to the air nomads. Now you're kind of getting back into the political world from this point on. This is how you're going to be dealt with as the avatar, and this is sort of how you should approach it. It's kind of interesting. Roku forced a smile. Thank you for the reminder, Sister Disha. His airbending master unclasped her hands and held up a small scroll. And one more thing before you depart. A final message from your friend. She winked. He smiled. He knew she meant Ta Min. They'd written to each other so frequently over the years. They'd taken to using a dedicated messenger hawk. A strong, golden-brown, feathered bird with a gloomy disposition that softened only when she was plied with treats. That's nice to know that Ta Min and Roku have been regularly going back and forth over the messenger hawk. That's cool. Still, he couldn't help but ask, nothing from Sozin? She shook her head. If anything arrives after you leave, we'll send it north. They both knew nothing would. For some reason, Sozin hadn't responded to any of Roku's missives in months. After Roku had written to say he'd be stopping by on the way north, the royal family's invitation had arrived with no actual message from Sozin. At least he'd see his old friend in person soon enough. Roku reached to take Ta Min's message, but a sudden breeze blew the scroll from Sister Disha's fingers. A short, lean airbender with sleepy eyes swept into the room, snatched the message out of the air, and grinned. Okay, let's address this. So, Sozin has not been responding to Roku. Now, this is where we have the kind of opening for the idea of, like, they are not meant to see each other until his return as a fully realized avatar. They already had to kind of work around that in the first book to get the scene that we got before. But, like, did they have any contact even via messages? Like that's certainly an opening that you can do, but they're kind of committing to it here of like Sozin's not really talking to him here. Now, of course, we remember the very ending of the first book and the idea of Sozin is the one who his view of Roku has changed because of the events of that book, whereas Roku kind of still views Sozin as being, you know, somewhat the same person. There's differences on both sides, but Sozin is the one who has more quickly kind of seemed to change, and like the friendship is maybe not the same as it once was more for him rather than the other way around. So it's interesting that he's purposefully not really responding here. I'm fascinated as well in this book to see like how much Sozin we get, because we kind of have to have the idea that he's plotting, doing stuff in the background. It's just he can't directly interact with Roku, at least super regularly. But anyway, Gyatso has arrived. Gyatso said, what's she have to say about the Earth Queen's court this time? Before the air nomad could break the wax seal, Roku exhaled a puff of air that sent the scroll fluttering back into his own hands. Sister Disha chuckled. I'll leave you to it. She pressed her fists together and bowed. Roku returned the gesture, bowing even more deeply. It's been an honor. Likewise, may the wind be at your back, she said. Please visit if you ever find yourself near the Eastern Air Temple. I will. Roku said, already aching for that day. So there's that. Oh yeah, and that's the other point here as well. It's like they said up here. What you have to say about the Earth Queen's court this time? That they are talking about Omashu there, based on the context from the first book. So it'll be interesting to see if they clarify that and what the whole situation there is. But anyway, we'll move on. Yeah, I will. Already aching for that day. Then she was gone. Gyatso brushed past Roku and hopped onto the windowsill, sitting with his back to the open air. Well, he asked, well, what? Are you going to read that? Roku angled his body away, broke the seal, and started to read as if settling into a hot spring. Ooh, straight away. My dearest Roku, let me begin by saying congratulations. I have no doubt that by the time you read these words, you will be a master airbender. I only hope this message reaches you before you depart for the north. The 36 tiers you described in your last message indeed sound much more daunting than the trials required of firebenders. But you are a studious and disciplined and determined avatar if there ever was one. I wish I felt as certain about my own endeavors. Omashu's court policies, it is Omashu that they're talking about here. Omashu's court policies are as complex as its network of delivery chutes. At times, I find it a thrilling challenge to navigate these ever-shifting alliances and enmities. At other times, I'm left wondering if I'm truly cut out for the life of an emissary. It is not exactly how I imagined it. Perhaps my father was right, and I should return to the capital and settle down with Prince Sozin. Ha! Did I fool you? The prince should be so lucky. In all seriousness, I wish I could say more about the complicated situation here. Suffice it to say that despite Queen Guozun's popularity among her people, there are those attempting to diminish her influence by weaving an ever-widening web of bureaucracy. I'd value your advice on a certain matter related to this, but I've come to learn that some information is best divulged face to face. Tell Gyatso I said hello and that there's a list waiting for him in the capital of all my favorite vegetarian eateries in the city. Since I know you probably never frequented any such place with Yasu or Sozin. May the spirits keep you, Avatar Roku. Send word the moment you reach Agnakela. Until we meet again, Ta Min. So pretty nice there, the letter from Ta Min, touching on a few things, the political situation in Omashu, or I guess maybe the idea during this era that Omashu maybe risks going down the Ba Sing Se road, maybe a little bit with the obsessiveness about the bureaucracy. That kind of tends to be an Earth Kingdom thing across the board. That's kind of interesting. There's a certain matter she wants to discuss, but wants to do it face to face. That's interesting. I wonder, does it relate to Sozin? So there's that. And then I like all the references, like that she knows, Sozin, Yasu, joking about a bunch of stuff. That's really, really nice. Roku reread the message, then passed it to Gyatso. As Gyatso read, Roku began mentally drafting a response. He'd be proud to tell Ta Min that she'd been right, and he had successfully passed the Air Nomad's test. He'd offer her encouragement in return. He had no doubt she possessed the intelligence, cunning, and charisma necessary to untangle the knot of Omashu policies and be a valuable diplomat for the Fire Nation. No need to settle for being the wife of the future Fire Lord, he'd joke. Ooh, Gyatso let out a sing-songy voice. Face to face, eh? I bet she wanted to write lips to lips. The wiry air nomad closed his eyes and puckered his own lips at the avatar. Roku sighed. I can't believe they granted you your arrows. I'll meet you at Lola, he said, and swung his staff as he turned to leave, sending out a soft burst of air that nearly pushed Gyatso out the open window. So, I like the teasing here overall. That's cool. Guzun and then Earth King Jailun. Yeah. Oh yeah, and then that is a big thing actually. That's definitely worth noting, is that like the event that I almost expected them to cover in the first book, the Night of Silent Sages, is surely something that has happened already at this point in time for sure. And like, how public is that information? That's definitely a big Earth Kingdom thing that would relate to a lot of politics and stuff like that. So we'll see if they go into it or not. So interesting. Next chapter, Emissary of the Fire Nation. Ta Min casually scanned the crowded room for her contact. So very, very cool here. Ta Min point of view chapters. I'm wondering, is this what they're doing here? That like they're going to pull back on Sozin and give those kind of chapters kind of to Ta Min? I actually really like that as a way to kind of involve things where like maybe Sozin can be involved in this section of the story where like he interacts with Ta Min and that sort of thing. And that's how we get our Sozin without it being all about Sozin. That's cool. So yeah, Gyatso has his arrows at this point in time. And of course it's on the cover as well. So that makes complete sense. So yeah, a woman who was supposed to be wearing robes embroidered with red spider lilies. Every Earthbender party had two distinct phases, and the current gathering was in the first. Every Earthbender party had two distinct phases. Okay, this one's in the first phase. Dignitaries and high-ranking officials stood around stiffly in their finery, chatting amiably as they nibbled at offerings and sipped their drinks. It was all very, very refined, very respectable. The second phase commenced after those with the highest social standing departed. People went from sipping to chugging, from nibbling to devouring, from chatting to shouting and singing, from idly standing to dancing. Acrobats and dancers and bawdy players and leashed beasts would be brought out. Behavior that would have brought a generation's worth of shame upon one's clan back in the Fire Nation went completely unremarked upon and would be forgotten in the morning. One might think, as Ta Min had in her early days at court, that this was the part of the night during which she might learn the most valuable information. However, that was not the case. People would become sloppy but not careless, and there seemed to be an unspoken rule against discussing anything remotely political at that point. Therefore, she'd quickly learn to leave before the revelry deepened. So that's an interesting kind of take on that dynamic. Continuing to keep an eye out for her contact, Ta Min began to mingle. She listened to the badger frog-shaped Minister of Commerce brag about how he garnered enough support to overturn the Queen's prohibition against using the delivery chutes after dark. So wait. Support to overturn the Queen's prohibition again. So this guy wants them to be used after dark. She asked a agricultural merchant from Ba Sing Se about the economic policies that were causing the price of rice to soar in the Fire Nation. She met a haggard healer from the Northern Water Tribe who mourned the fact that none of the governments devoted enough attention or resources to the different illnesses spreading as international trade expanded. She talked with a slow-speaking sandbender about the spiritual enlightenment attainable via cactus juice. That's very, very interesting. A healer involved here. There's the reference of the illnesses. But in this case, it's like, a lot of international trade may be causing illnesses from different places to kind of spread. But is that the one we dealt with in the opening chapter, or is that something different? And then, a sandbender. Interesting. This was the part of the job she enjoyed, connecting with people from all walks of life, from all over the world, and expanding her knowledge of their customs, cultures, and histories. Someday she hoped to rise high enough in the ranks that she could truly use this knowledge to build relationships, advocate for policies, and foster cooperation to help maintain peace while improving the lives of the people across the four nations. But since Prince Sozin had pulled the necessary strings to post Ta Min in Omashu, he expected more from her in return. He would send messages instructing her to meet one contact or another at a certain time and place, and then that contact would convey the specifics of a requested task. Generally, the assignments were of the type he'd never put in writing, becoming riskier as time went on. A sensitive question to answer, a conversation to eavesdrop upon, a rumor to confirm, a story to plant, a message to intercept. In essence, she served as another one of his spies. Okay, so this is very, very interesting. overall here, what we're doing here with Ta Min. So I guess she's going to hit a point where Sozin puts her in too crazy of a position, and there's maybe some issues that arise here. But like, Ta Min also can't maybe develop too much of a conflict herself with Sozin, because he's still meant to be publicly good to most people at this point in time. So I guess there's more subtleties going on here, and they're playing more on the just, the nations out for themselves, and that's just the expected dynamic type thing. But anyway, completing these additional duties required Ta Min to undergo unofficial training that often took her to the lower, shadier levels of the city. It was there, often late at night, where she brushed up on her firebending, learned to pick locks, practiced scaling stone walls, fashioned convincing disguises, or plied the servants of the rich and powerful for sensitive information about their employers. So wow, Ta Min really getting up to quite a lot of work. There's a slight maybe reference to like some of the kind of stuff with Jin. It's like, oh wow, like we already knew from the first book she was a firebender, but they're actually using that kind of side of her character as well quite a lot here, which is interesting. Ta Min was never given reasons or context to see the larger picture. She was never asked to harm anyone, yet accomplishing Sozin's little missions always made her soul feel sullied. Though he had made it clear from the start that the choice was hers, deciding not to help him meant sacrificing her post in Omashu, as well as any possible future as an emissary of the Fire Nation. Every time she wrote to Roku, she considered asking his thoughts as to whether it was worth it, but she never did out of fear that it might change the Avatar's opinion of her. Someone spilled a drink, there was a burst of raucous laughter, the music picked up, and the highest ranking and more reserved started to bid their farewells. Ta Min ground her teeth and scanned the crowd again. Where was her contact? A trio of fire ferrets in matching hats scurried into the middle of the room and began an astoundingly coordinated dance. It was interrupted after only a few moments when an overenthusiastic member of the audience stumbled forward, embraced one of the creatures, and wouldn't let it go. As the animal trainer tried to pry the poor fire ferret from his grip, someone sidled up next to Ta Min. "Dirt eaters," the person muttered in disgust. Ta Min glanced over and was surprised to find she recognized the slender young woman with long black hair and golden brown skin who was now standing next to her. Even more surprising, the woman was wearing crimson robes with a shiny petaled spider lilies embroidered around the skirt. "Good evening, Dalasai." Ta Min greeted Princess Zaysan's ex-girlfriend and Sozin's confidant. So really cool to see Dalasai again. They obviously placed her in a sort of position of importance right at the end of the last book as well, working kind of more specifically with Sozin, and again, like that played into the plot of the first book as well. So this is kind of exciting. First mention of Princess Zaysan, of course, as well in the book. I wonder how much information we're going to get on her in the middle of all of this, because it feels maybe a little bit too early for her plot to properly kick into gear. But like, hey, I don't know. Maybe we'll get a Ryoshan reference at some point, because their initial meeting kind of, I guess, surely is something that's maybe coming up soon, or has already happened. We'll see. Dalasai nodded in greeting, eyes still fixed on the undignified chaos unraveling in front of them. The other two fire ferrets had joined the scrum and were yanking the overenthusiastic man's hair and ears to try and free their companion while the onlookers chortled. "Shall we?" "You don't want to see how this turns out?" Ta Min asks. Dalasai made a disgusted face. "I do not." They slipped away from the crowd and out to the terrace, shutting the doors behind them to muffle the commotion within. They wandered over to the stone balustrade, and Ta Min leaned over it while Dalasai leaned back against it so that they were facing opposite directions. It was a cool, clear evening. The nearly full moon glowed overhead, bathing Omashu in soft silver light. The steep green ceramic tiled roofs of the innumerable stone structures swept downwards in every direction, growing increasingly crowded until they kissed the outer walls towards the base of the mountain. Only a few scattered lanterns remained lit, and the city was still, except for the occasional stone carts that whooshed down the labyrinthine chutes. Tommen steeled herself for whatever unpleasant task lay ahead and cut right to the heart of the matter. What does he want me to do this time? Dalasai crossed her arms over her chest. There's a meeting in a few days, she said, between Omashu's Minister of Peace and Ba Sing Se's. Okay, that's a big one, I guess. Tommen arched an eyebrow. That's a big deal, she noted. Though the two cities were both under the Earth King's banner, Queen Guozun and Earth King Jailun operated almost independently of each other. The fact that the meeting was between the officials in each city who were charged with quelling internal dissent and protecting their respective regions from external threats piqued Tommen's curiosity more than usual. Dalasai nodded. Prince Sozin would very much like to know what it's about. So that's obviously a pretty big one in terms of just internal stuff there. Like getting into the kind of heart of the matter of like the idea of like, yeah, why do we have a king/queen of Omashu? Like the full scope of that. Is it just a historical title for the most part because of the importance of Omashu to like earthbending? Or is there kind of more to it that's like that goes into like almost deeper kind of political history? It's interesting if they'll get into it at all. But anyway, Tommen grimaced. The security of such a meeting will be tight. How am I supposed to get close enough to hear their discussion clearly without being discovered? Dalasai shrugged. Not my problem, she said. After sharing exactly when and where the meeting would occur, she headed back inside, leaving Tommen alone on the terrace to figure things out herself. So yeah, we have not seen Kozuru yet in the book. Kozuru would be the other member of like Team Sozin from the book. I'm guessing we'll meet her again at some point in this book, but we'll see what happens. And then yeah, that's the end of the chapter. And then as you can see here on the preview here, they skip the entire rest of the book. It's a preview. And they do, for some reason, give you the epilogue. I don't know why they do this. I get wanting to probably show you maybe like the last kind of page of the book, which is technically like the back cover. But there's no reason for the preview to be done in such a way where like it just happens to have the last like 10 pages of the book. I'm not going to go into this just because, you know, it might have kind of deeper spoilers in it, and it's not kind of worth going into here. So I will look up the Google Books preview pretty quickly here. Google Books, and see can we find what's going on here. Okay, here we go. Preview. So, what do we have here? Okay, so it's definitely the ebook version that we have here. Let me just scroll down and see, can we get Emissary of the Fire Nation? Yes. Okay, yep. Let me just bring this over. So we do have the Google Books preview. Let me link this, I guess, if I can. It is google.ie. You might have to change the Google ending of the URL to something else. But either way, it's there. If you search Awakening of Roku, Google Books preview, 2 will come up. 1 I think is for the physical, 1 is for the digital version, but that's that. Okay, so let's see what we could do here. Let me just adjust this a little bit so you can actually see it. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we went from not my problem, and then we have the next chapter here. The best avatar I know. Let me just quickly check how much we have left here. Okay, looks like a longish chapter here. Okay, and then the next one. Oh, and the next one. How many chapters do we get here? Oh wow, we just keep going. We'll see how this goes. I'm not sure if I'm gonna fully read through all of this, but we'll keep going for now. Anyway, this is quite a long preview. Okay. Okay. The best avatar I know. It was a humid, cloudy afternoon when Roku, Gyatso, and Lola approached the volatile outer reaches of the Fire Nation archipelago. The first scattering of islands dotted the horizon across the expanse of deep blue, as if some massive spirit had chucked a handful of rocks into the sea. Roku sat up and rolled out his neck. A nauseated feeling settled in his stomach. Excitement or apprehension. Gyatso smoothed a hand over the tattooed arrow that ran over his scalp. Still unused to the raised skin scarred with the sky blue ink. How many islands make up the Fire Nation? He asked. Over 5,000, Roku said proudly. But out here, most are uninhabited. So that's a really interesting one, that they actually put anything resembling a kind of number on that. It certainly leaves them a lot of openings for like comics and future books to be set on these 5,000 islands if they need to. So there we go. They're never going to run out. That is actually a crazy number. Again, I'm assuming there's a bunch of ones that are like technically islands, but they're literally so small that like there's nothing on them. So, but still, that's quite crazy overall. Anyway, some were so small they would disappear with the rising tide. So yeah, exactly. Just need to read the next line. Some were barren landscapes with strange formations, little more than a fresh heaps of hardened lava. Some were themselves active volcanoes that could erupt at any moment, and some were sizable verdant isles, too remote to settle. So there's probably a couple thousand of them. Like, we can't use them for store, but still, even if like a fifth of them are usable islands, that's still a crazy amount. Gyatso peered past Lola's horns, the left of which was missing its tip. Are any of those Lombok Island? He asked. Roku shook his head. It's much further east. Gyatso cast a plaintive gaze in that direction, even though there was nothing to see but more water, more waves cresting in long, slow rows. I'm almost predicting a Malaya reference here. Yeah. Thinking of Malaya, Roku asked. Gyatso nodded. There are some people who stay with you throughout your life, he reflected, and some whose path crosses yours briefly but alter you forever. Roku knew this to be true. You could miss and mourn and love all at the same time without clinging to the despair of stolen futures if you learn to appreciate how someone's existence, no matter how brief, continued to resonate throughout the lives of those they touched. Still, it never stopped hurting. May her flame light our way, Roku said. I wouldn't be alive right now if she hadn't warned me about Chief Ulo. Another mark against relying on his own judgment. Neither would I, Gyatso said, though his remark was less literal. He had started to fall for the young woman, and opening up to her about losing his sister had helped Gyatso reframe his grief and reconnect with his airbending. But I've come to accept I'm destined to lose everyone I love. Ooh, that's a harsh one. So yeah, you could tell Gyatso is definitely still dealing with some stuff. That's a pretty heavy line there. I'm wondering what they're going to do in this book in relation to that, like, at all. But anyway, a flock of white birds sailed past. Tears welled in the air nomad's eyes as he watched. Roku scooted closer on the saddle and put his arm around his friend's shoulders. You haven't lost me. Gyatso wiped his eyes. Not yet. And that is interesting to think about, because obviously he does eventually lose him. Because, of course, Aang and Gyatso is like the the first kind of real dynamic that we know of with Gyatso. So it does eventually happen. It makes me actually really want a short story somewhere that is like the moment Gyatso found out about Roku's death and how he kind of felt about it. But I don't know where we'd ever get that story, but it sounds like something that we kind of need at this point. That sounds like a really interesting one to do now. So yeah, you haven't lost me, not yet. Okay. As the first fire islands neared, the dark blue water of the deep turned to the semi-transparent turquoise of the shallows. Soon the sea was dotted with fishing boats, and the coast were peppered with small villages with humble docks. These gradually gave way to cities with bustling ports, while coastlines smoothed into volcanic plains that led to lush jungles and mountainous valleys. Lola carried them over one final ridge, and on the other side waited a vast harbour. The bay's placid water was crowded with ships coming and going, flying flags from all over the world. The city hugged the harbour and stretched all the way to the foot of the looming caldera that held the most important building of the Fire Nation within, including the Royal Palace. "Welcome to Harry Bulkin," Roku announced with forced excitement. "The Fire Nation capital, my old home and your new one. Yay," Gyatso said just as flatly. So it's really interesting to see that they're both just like, the Fire Nation. Woo. That's a funny reaction after like the early stages of the first book, where like Roku was not super happy about how things kind of changed. But yeah, we'll move on. After registering at the port, they flew to the caldera and visited Roku's family. This is interesting because this, apart from his grandmother, apparently he doesn't. We know he doesn't have a great relationship with the rest of his family because of what happened in the aftermath of Yasu's death. So this is a really interesting one to see like how these dynamics actually go. How much has he interacted with them via letters since and stuff like that. This will be really interesting to see. The cook had prepared Roku's favorite meal from childhood, sinigang soup, white rice and crispy roast pig chicken, and fresh mango. And on the surface, his parents seemed happy to meet Gyatso and see their surviving son again. There were the expected comments about how tall and strong he'd grown in his absence, questions about his training at the Southern Air Temple, and judgment about his lack of interest in searching for a wife while he was in town, despite his parents' prepared list of potential candidates. They filled him in on the clan's business and notified him of the elders who had passed on, most of whom Roku didn't remember. Okay, so let's see in the chat here. Sinigang, that's a Filipino dish. Yeah, so that would make sense. Randy Rabai adding more of the kind of Filipino kind of culture stuff into Avatar. So that's interesting. After they did quite a bit of that in the first book, and then yeah, he's not super enthused about a lot of the specific clan stuff here. So they kind of just see it as like, oh, you're actually doing okay as the Avatar. I guess this will increase our standing among the other clans. Let's get you back involved in things. But yet Roku couldn't help but notice the way his parents kept exchanging meaningful glances. The way they occasionally started to say something, only to hesitate and change the subject. And then they swiftly excused themselves from dinner without touching the fried plantain, even before tea was served. "There's something important they're not telling me," Roku said to Gyatso as he watched the servants begin to clear the dishes. So what's going on here? That's interesting. Gyatso shoved Roku's father's untouched portion of plantain into his mouth before it was taken away. "Like what?" he asked. "I don't know." Gyatso swallowed, wiped his mouth. "I'm sure they'll tell you when they're ready." Roku sighed. "We're not really the kind of family that is ever ready to talk about difficult things. I've spoken with you about Yasu much more than I ever did with them. after his death. I spoke more with you about Yasu than I did with them after his death. Yeah, okay, so he and his parents, basically apart from the funeral, never really discussed it as the lingering issue here. Rain began to fall, pelting the roof. Roku led Gyatso to the tea room, and they sat down on the tatami mats. They waited patiently as the servants brought out tea and began to prepare it, using firebending to warm the water to perfection. As Roku watched, he marveled at how he had lived the first 16 years of his life without doing such simple tasks for himself. So yeah, back to the nobility here. A complete contrast is interesting. At sunrise the next morning, Roku and Gyatso meditated, ate a light breakfast, and hiked up to the rim of the caldera and leapt into the open air with their gliders. As they circled over the city beneath another overcast, humid sky, Roku pointed out his favorite bathhouses and eateries and street food vendors, emphasizing those that Gyatso might find the most interesting, like a tea house in which the capybara cats roamed freely. That's an interesting animal. Yet Gyatso remained uncharacteristically quiet. And when the tour concluded and Roku swept towards the royal palace, the airbender's face grew grim. They landed in the courtyard and flicked their gliders closed. Guards immediately approached, while others stationed along the ramparts shifted into firebending stances. "State your business," one of the guards said, blocking their way. Roku started to open his mouth, but Gyatso spoke first. "This is Avatar Roku," he declared with mock pompousness, chest puffed up, master of 2 elements. "Why do you have to say it like that?" Roku muttered to his friend as he fished through his satchel. He pulled out the scroll that contained the Fire Lord's summons and presented it to the guards. "I'm here to see the royal family." The guard took the scroll, examined the message, and handed it back with a sneer. "Welcome home, Avatar Roku," he said bitterly, and stepped aside with a bow. So that is amazing from Gyatso there. Like, initially he thinks like, oh, he's announcing me, kind of like just to kind of save this situation, but then master of 2 elements, kind of bringing it down a few levels is pretty great. "Thank you," Roku said, confused by the strange reception. He started to walk forward, but stopped and turned around when Gyatso didn't follow. "Everything okay?" Gyatso stared past Roku at the palace. It was an imposing structure in the dark, fiery shades that loomed over an expansive stone square. A colossal tower rose at the center, from which 3 wings radiated, each terminating in elaborate pagodas. Gyatso shuddered. "This place gives me the creeps." Roku had grown up in the shadow of the royal palace, but he tried to see it through his friend's eyes. It did call to mind the shape and feel of a volcano on the verge of eruption. He supposed it might be intimidating to someone accustomed to the light and airy southern air temple, which perched among the clouds and mountaintops like a dream. "I'll wait for you here," Gyatso decided. "Are you certain?" Roku asked. "Meeting Sozin and Firelord Taiso would be a great way to begin establishing yourself in the capital." Gyatso cast one more nervous glance back at the palace before shifting his gaze back to the Avatar. "I'm sure our paths will cross in time." Okay, so Gyatso doesn't want to go in. Of course, one of the speculations from the very end of the first book is sort of, where exactly is Gyatso when it comes to Sozin? Like, is he immediately like convinced that Sozin did something? Like, how much does he specifically know about the full scope of this? That feels like what's maybe informing this situation here is the encounter with Sozin. But anyway, I think we're getting into it here. Sozin had always been a sore spot between the two of them. Gyatso never seemed to forgive Sozin for lying about Lombok Island, but Roku had always sensed that the air nomad's mistrust of the Crown Prince went even deeper than that. So obviously it is the suspicions of what exactly happened to Malaya. So Roku nodded and didn't push it further. He made his way alone across the square toward the palace. The closer he got, the faster his heart began to race. By the time he reached the entrance, his palms were so sweaty he had to wipe them on his robes. He showed the Fire Lord's invitation to the next set of guards, whose reception was as brusque as that of those at the gate. Except, instead of simply stepping aside, one of the guards said, "Follow me," and began to lead the way. As Roku followed her down the familiar long halls, he was surprised to find that she missed the turn he'd expected them to take. "The royal quarters are that way," he pointed out, lingering at the intersection. "I was instructed to take you to the throne room," she said without stopping. Roku jogged to catch up, feeling more worried now than nervous. He had chalked up Sozan's increasingly infrequent correspondence to his friend being too busy to write after being put in charge of the nation's affairs with Omashu. But what if there was another reason? What if Roku had done or said something to offend Sozan or the Fire Lord? So I guess the setup here is obviously that he is not going to meet Sozan here. So Sozan is not going to be here, and it's only going to be Taiso that he speaks to, I'm guessing. He would find out soon enough. A final set of guards stood at the entrance to the throne room. Silently, they took Roku's staff and satchel, opened the massive doors, and moved aside. A finely woven burgundy carpet lined by red and gold pillars led the way to the slightly elevated perch at the end of the room. Firelord Taiso sat upon the throne, behind which loomed a golden relief of an imperious dragon that seemed to stare directly at the supplicant. Roku's heart sank, however, when he saw the empty benches on either side of the Fire Lord's seat. Sozan was not here, and I guess Zaysan isn't here either. So that's interesting. Roku gathered himself and approached. He stopped the proper distance away, pressed his fist to the base of his other hand's open palm, and bowed deeply. "It is an honor, Firelord Taiso," Roku greeted. Firelord Taiso sat rigidly. Compared to the last time Roku saw him, his hair and his beard, which was shaved down to the chin, were noticeably more grey than black. His already pale skin was lighter, his face carved with deeper wrinkles, and his golden eyes were dimmer. Though he still conveyed an undoubtedly commanding presence, Roku couldn't help but feel there was something diminished about Sozan's father. "You finally deign to return home, and you arrive in foreign clothing," the Fire Lord said, firing an opening salvo. Of course, he immediately goes to this. You're not wearing the right clothing. You're a fire avatar. You should look like a fire avatar, I guess is the idea. "Oh," Roku looked down at himself, suddenly self-conscious at his worn yellow and orange travelling robes. Why didn't he think to have a new set of formal Fire Nation robes fitted before this meeting? "They're really comfortable," he mumbled, feeling less like the Avatar and more like the little boy who used to run underfoot with the Crown Prince. And what was the Fire Lord? What was that? Fire Lord Taiso said about deigning to return home? "I've been told you recently mastered airbending," the Fire Lord asked before Roku could parse the meaning behind his initial comment. So yeah, deign to come home. So there's obviously some sort of a thing where like, really? You're showing up here kind of after what you've done? And there's a little bit of like, what did I do? I'm guessing this is an issue over the Fire and Air Center of Learning. The fact that that's happening. And that was something he agreed upon with Sozan. He told Sozan to like, basically like make sure your father agrees to this. So that was something like Roku kind of forced through. So it's either that or just he's not happy on which side of the issue from book one that Roku kind of ended up on, or something like that. We'll see. Roku straightened up and nodded proudly. "Zito was a fully realized avatar by your age." So there is a pretty notable detail about Avatar Zito. I don't think we knew that before. So like Roku's like 19 or 20 at this point in time, and then we're going for like, okay, Zito is pretty early, fully realized early. So they continue to add to the trend of like, wow, like none of the avatars actually do the training kind of typically, or Zito maybe just did it a little bit quicker. I don't know. Still, it's interesting, a detail there. But anyway, Zito found out he was the Avatar early. No, I'd probably have to go back and read the details on Zito off the top of my head about what exactly we knew. But anyway, still interesting to get another comment about it. Roku forced a smile. There are as many paths to full avatarhood as there are avatars, so there's the kind of tagline overall. He said, barring the words of Sister Disha had always used to reassure Roku when he began to compare himself to Kyoshi, Karuk, or any of his other incarnations. "Yes," the Fire Lord conceded. "I suppose some are slower than others, but I didn't summon you here to discuss protracted peregrinations." Um, what? I actually don't know what this word means. Let me actually Google this. Let's see. Peregrination is a journey, especially a long or meandering one. Okay. Okay. One of those ones where it's like, okay, could you not have just have said like meandering journey here? But okay. That's fine. FCE used a couple of like fancy words in the other books as well. Okay. Okay. So it had been the Fire Lord who sent the invitation, not Sozin. Roku glanced at the empty bench next to the Fire Lord's throne again. Will the prince be joining us? He asked. No, the Fire Lord says. When can I see? He's traveling. He will not return for some time. Oh, Roku's shoulders sagged. If Fire Lord Taiso noticed Roku's disappointment, he didn't care. He pressed on. I wanted to speak to you, young Avatar Roku, because the Fire Nation could use your help. Roku tensed. The last time he'd heard that line, it had been followed by a lie. Here I was thinking you simply missed me, Roku replied, channeling Gyatso to try and lighten the mood. The Fire Lord ignored Roku's comment. The Northern Water Tribe has been harassing our merchant ships in the Northern Sea. Searches, seizures, denials at ports of entry. It's not enough to violate any of our peace or trade negotiations. They always have a reason, but it's costing our merchants valuable time and resources. That doesn't sound like the Northern Water Tribe. What reasons do they give? Firelord didn't answer. His face went slack, and a faraway look came over him. Roku glanced around, thinking that the Firelord was distracted by someone or something behind him, but they were still alone, save for the guards who stood as still as statues. Must be some other important matter occupying his thoughts. Firelord Taiso? Roku tried. The Firelord blinked, his eyes snapped back into focus, he cleared his throat. As I was saying, he continued before drifting off. So, what happened here? Okay, okay, the issue with the North. Okay, that's a kind of RPG, a little bit of the RPG reference. Roku's like, that sounds like maybe a shipping company or something like that, not the Northern Water Tribe, maybe. And then his face went slack. He got a faraway look. He's looking at something off into the distance. That's interesting. Are they just saying that like he's getting older, like what we were talking about before, that like the energy just doesn't seem to be there? He's beginning to mentally kind of fade a little bit. Is that what we're going for here? Because I guess we have to be setting up the idea that like literally within the next, I think it's like again, I'd have to look up the exact numbers, but like it's at some point within the next like 3 to 6-ish years, I think, that like Sozin becomes Firelord. So they're starting the setup for, okay, questions are going to begin to be asked about, is Taiso fit to be Firelord from this point on? Sozin's going to be gradually set up in the background in terms of his successes we're going to see elsewhere. So you can see the idea of what's going on here. Now, as has been mentioned in chat there a little bit, is, I think we almost have to assume that a lot of stuff happening here is Sozin manipulation. So, like, is this just age with Taiso, or is Sozin facilitating this happening through poisoning or something like that? We don't know, but we'll see. Anyway, Fire Nation ships. Right. It's not your concern why they're being harassed. It would be helpful to speak with Chief Tigua when you reach Agna Kel-A, the Firelord commanded, and ensure it comes to an end. Okay, so that's interesting, because the chief in the Roku era RPG is Skiri, not this character. So, and there's not like a giant gap of time, especially after a 3-year time skip between where this book is and where the RPG kind of starts. So that's interesting in terms of like we're actually going to see some leadership changes that happen actually relatively quickly overall. So Skiri could be introduced at some point soon, I guess. So that's interesting. Overall. Anyway, where were we here? Ensure comes to an end. Okay, so he's just demanding, I think like Disha said earlier on, everyone will ask you for things and they will say that this is the right thing to do, and you just have to, as the avatar, make the choice kind of correctly. Disha's caution about how others regard him was proving true. This sounds like a task better suited for one of your trade officials or my grand advisor, the Fire Lord suggested as he looked pointedly at Roku, who knew that Zito had served their nation in that exact capacity while he was Avatar. So that's the big thing about Zito presented in like the initial Shadow of Kyoshi kind of backstory about him, is just like the super connection of Zito with the kind of Fire Nation kind of government. So as Grand Advisor. So that's a nice reference. Roku said nothing. He'd already made it clear to Sozin that he wouldn't be following in Zito's footsteps in that way. Should you succeed, Firelord Taiso continued, I'll ensure your clan's financial troubles disappear. So, okay, here we go. Clan's financial troubles. That must be why his parents were acting so strangely last night. Roku clenched his jaw. They should have told him. He received no payment for serving the world as Avatar, but he might have helped them find a solution to whatever mess they were in. Maybe he still could. Roku raised his chin defiantly. That sounds like a threat, Firelord Taiso. Consider it a fair exchange of your services, young Avatar. Such is how the world works. I'll inquire about the situation, Roku said, but I promise nothing and ask nothing in return. Firelord Taiso offered a small nod that signaled both disappointment and dismissal. Roku bowed, glad to go. One more thing, Firelord Taiso said. The Avatar lingered. The Fire Lord's eyes shifted to the prince's crown that held Roku's hair knot in place. Sozin had gifted Roku the golden headpiece, which was a smaller and less ornate version of the one that adorned the top of Taiso's head. The air nomads have been feeding you their misguided beliefs about detachment, but know that those who forget where they come from often find that they have no place to which they can return. I'll keep that in mind. So that's obviously kind of the idea of like, remember what nation you're from, Avatar. Kind of, he's trying to kind of tell him here. So that's interesting. Those who forget where they from where they come often find they have no place to which they can return. Yeah. So that's the idea there of like these kind of subtle threats of like, do you want to have a place to kind of return to? Now his family's in trouble financially. Interesting. And again, has this been facilitated maybe by Taiso or maybe even Sozin? We'll have to wait and see. Or it could just be the family getting themselves into trouble. We don't know. Let's get out of here, Roku said when he returned to Gyatso. The young air nomad was leaning back against the stone wall outside the gates as he used his airbending to idly spin a few leaves over his open palm. Meeting didn't go so well, Gyatso asked, letting the leaves flutter as he rose to his feet. Roku shook his head. Sozin wasn't there, and his father simply wanted to order me around like I'm his lackey. Where was Sozin? Traveling is all the Fire Lord would say. He knew you'd be visiting, right? Gyatso asked. Roku tightened the grip around his staff as he looked back at the royal palace and nodded. Had Sozin timed his travels so that their paths wouldn't cross? If so, why? And what had Roku done to deserve the disrespect with which the Fire Lord had treated him? Now that he was out of the throne room, he could clearly see the man's comments were meant to sow self-doubt. It was the same tactic Roku had witnessed Firelord Taiso use on Sozin countless times when they were growing up to stoke Sozin's desire to earn his father's approval. He flicked open his glider, Gyatso did the same. They ran and tugged a gust under their paper wings, which lifted them into the air. And what did Taiso order you to do? Gyatso asked as they soared higher. Roku shared the few details he knew about the situation in the northern waters, but he left out the part about the Fire Lord's offer. Interesting. Gyatso made a face, clearly thinking of the last time a Fire Nation royal had appealed to Roku for assistance. Are you going to do it? Despite his non-committal response to the Fire Lord, Roku shook his head decisively. It's Fire Nation business. The Fire Lord can figure it out for himself. And Gyatso looked relieved. So again, the idea here is that, like, Roku is going to the north to start his waterbending training. And now he's kind of heard about a Fire Nation issue with the north. But then he's going to encounter this illness issue. And the idea seems to be that I guess he's going to prioritize the illness issue over the Fire Nation kind of logistics political issue. And this is going to be another thing that kind of affects his dynamic as a fire avatar, I guess. That's kind of interesting. That there's actually kind of 3 reasons he's kind of going to the Northern Water Tribe. Which is interesting. Or like one he's going to find out about. Okay, he looked relieved. They landed on the northern rim of the caldera and snapped their gliders closed. He gazed back at the palace as a warm breeze carrying the scent of rain ruffled his robes and his hair. It soothed his frustrations, calmed his nerves, and brought a sense of clarity. I thought I would be proud to come home as this completely different person, Roku said. Instead, I feel like I'm a kid again. Not good enough for my parents, not good enough for my nation, and certainly not good enough to be the world's avatar. You are enough, Gyatso reassured him, no matter how they view you. Roku still didn't know if that was true. I'm sorry, Gyatso. I know I told you I'd stay with you here for a few days to show you around and help you get settled in, but it's time for me to leave for the north. So wow, Roku really doesn't want to stay here. That's quite interesting that they're kind of like really setting up Roku to be a bit of a, like, at least at this point, like, he really doesn't want to stay in the Fire Nation at all, like, very opposite of Zito. But obviously we know he will eventually return. He'll live on one of the islands and stuff like that. It's kind of interesting. Gyatso could take care of himself, and with Sozin out of the city and Tommen still in Omashu, there was no reason to remain in the capital. Even the initial determination he'd felt to help his parents with whatever financial situation his clan was facing had melted away. If his parents wanted his help, they would have asked for it. Okay. But Gyatso didn't look as crestfallen as the sudden goodbye as Roku had expected. Instead, the airbender grinned. Great, let's go. Roku raised an eyebrow. You're coming with me? Of course. What about your assignment? Gyatso looked away. It's not going anywhere. Roku scratched the back of his head. He wasn't eager to help Gyatso disobey the elders. I don't know, Gyatso. The air monk pressed his free hand to his heart. I promise I'll come straight back after Lola and I drop you off. I won't even stop to ride an Arctic elephant koi. Arctic elephant koi is interesting. A variation, I guess. There seemed to be more to Gyatso's hesitance to begin his work, but what was a few extra weeks when Gyatso's task would surely keep him in the capital for years? Besides, Roku wasn't quite ready to be alone. Mr. started the stream. Yes, it does seem like they have directly... feels like a bit of a copy-paste job that they have reused the same paragraph here. I'm pointing to the right one, yeah. They have to use the same paragraph here. So it doesn't seem like that's meant to be there for this book, but they have, which is a little bit concerning. Like, I hope that's not on the physical book, but the preview on Amazon does seem to be that. So that's a bit frustrating. We still don't know the name of Roku's parents, right? No, I don't believe they were named in the first book, and I don't think I've seen their names here. So yeah, that is still something we are waiting for. Okay, takes it to Sky Bison Whistle. I don't care what anyone says. You're the best avatar I know. Wow, thanks. That means so very much. Anytime. Blew the whistle, sending a deafening, high-pitched shriek rippling across the city. They waited for a long time for Lola to appear. She had an independent streak and often roamed far when apart from Gyatso. It wasn't uncommon for her to return with leaves or twigs from plants native to distant lands tangled in her fur or stuck between her teeth. Last year, she'd even come back with the tip of her left horn broken off, and they could only wonder how that had happened. So Lola likes to go on solo adventures, which is interesting. After the Sky Bison finally arrived, they mounted her saddle and she carried them away, glad to be free of this palace, this city, this nation with quick fire faith. Roku didn't look back. Okay. Next. Okay, Sozin chapter. A very long day. Prince Sozin sat at his father's side, still fuming. He had reluctantly submitted when the Fire Lord commanded him to stop responding to Roku's messages. So there's direct confirmation. Taiso is stopping this. But he had never thought his father would refuse to let Sozin see his best friend while he was in the city. And now, from what he'd heard, the Avatar was already gone. So I think that's kind of interesting, because it still speaks to the idea of like Sozin's not quite the absolute mastermind of everything just yet. Like, he's not quite powerful enough to fully make everything happen. So Taiso is still able to like have this kind of control over him here, and playing this game of like, okay, if Roku's going to be this kind of independent avatar, let's keep you away from him and stuff like that. I don't know. I'm guessing maybe part of the idea here is he maybe doesn't want Roku to start like rubbing off on Sozin. Like the influence of this developed Roku on Sozin might actually be good for him, and he kind of wants him to kind of stew on his own and kind of become like this very specific type of leader. At least that's my take on it so far. We probably still need to get a little bit more information, but that's what this chapter, I guess, is for. According to Taiso, it was all about laying the groundwork to ensure the Avatar remained loyal. Keep a man guessing where he stands with you, his father has explained, and he'll do everything he can to gain your regard. Okay, so it's Taiso just being like, if I keep Sozin away from Roku, Roku will be more inclined to kind of do stuff for me, so he can kind of keep the friendship up. That's kind of interesting. But obviously, what we're seeing here is that Sozin's response to this is just like, why are you controlling me in this way? And the setup is probably going to be, the kind of rebellion, the reprisal from Sozin against his father for this is going to be interesting when it happens. It did not escape Sozin that his father employed this same strategy to child rearing, which is why Sozin knew it to be effective. Not only was he angry with his father, but Sozin was also bored to tears. The dozen or so royal advisors who kneeled before them took turns reporting their areas of concern, sharing their supposed insights, and awaiting the Fire Lord's instructions. The windows were shut against the night, flames flickered in the braziers lined against the walls, casting long, quick, shifting shadows against the high-ceilinged room. They'd been at it for hours, and there was no end in sight. It pained Sozin deeply to be stuck in this stuffy room with these crusty old men, most of whom already seemed to have one foot in the eternal flame. It wasn't that long ago that he'd been out in the world doing as he pleased. After Roku had left, he'd crossed the sea to the Earth Kingdom. He'd found Wan Shi Tong's spirit library. He'd located a lost island with a sacred cave that briefly enhanced his bending 1,000-fold. He defeated a powerful outer island separatist and even saved the Avatar. Well, not that last part, truth be told. Roku had been the one to defeat the crazy old man and save Sozin, but the truth didn't need to be told. And because it hadn't been, the story that spread elevated Sozin more quickly than he ever could have imagined. Afterward, Taiso had even charged Sozin with managing the nation's affairs with Omashu. I actually hope that in the Sozin chapters they go into that. Like, he obviously took a certain amount of information out of the library, but like, are we going to cover like what he's focused on and stuff like that? Like the whole, lightning aspect, is that going to be something that gets brought up? Is the comet referenced again? Those type of things going to be interesting. Okay, Sozin was under no illusion that he had truly won his father's respect. In fact, his father had a way of looking at him sometimes that made him suspect the man knew the truth of what had transpired on that remote island. And what Fire Lord Taiso lacked in bending prowess, he more than made up for with political cunning. He simply sensed the people's regard for the young prince surging and knew he could wield his son as a torch to illuminate the Fire Nation's future. To extinguish any doubts about the strength of the royal family's lineage, Sozin, meanwhile, was fully aware torches were a tool. But constantly accompanying his father meant no more sailing across the sea, no more crossing the other nations on a whim, no more discovering lost islands. He barely even had time to keep up with his training, let alone to pursue any of the legendary firebending powers he'd read about while in the library. Okay, so Taiso is sort of holding him back here at this point in time. Taiso kind of just wants to use the fact that Sozin is viewed as a popular figure and just increase that sort of general political status of the family, that we're still powerful, but he's not letting Sozin pursue anything he truly wants to do. So yeah, the setup here seems to be that Sozin is going to, I guess, lash out against his father, I guess, theoretically at some point, and that's potentially going to be a pretty shocking moment, potentially, depending on how they do it, of course. But anyway, because okay, we already did that. Instead, his days were now filled with one mind-numbing meeting after another. If it wasn't the royal advisors, it was the generals or the foreign emissaries or the representatives of the clans and guilds, or the fire sages, or any other number of those with endless complaints. In this way, securing his future as Fire Lord turned out to be less a reward than a punishment, for now at least. So, yeah. He still has to do this kind of basic kind of political stuff required if he is to be Fire Lord one day, but he really doesn't enjoy the setup for the succession, I guess. Sozin, his father, barked. Answer the question. Sozin sat up straighter, cleared his throat. Apologies, father. Yes, the question. He had no idea what the question was. His mind had drifted, as it so often did during these long sessions. He scanned the room until his eyes landed on the advisor, who regarded Sozin with the most expectant gaze of the bunch. It was the broad-shouldered, large-gutted man with the beard stiff as old straw who oversaw trade concerns. Tell me more, Sozin said, employing his go-to command that he issued whenever he needed to stall. The man looked about uncertainly, unsure of what more to say. He already laid out the most important details of whatever situation he just relayed to Firelord Taiso, and now was at a loss for how to avoid repeating himself. Firelord Taiso hated when people wasted his time by repeating themselves. The straw-bearded man cleared his throat. Yes, another thing to consider, Prince Sozin, is the quality of the goods. That wasn't very helpful, but if Taiso was expecting a response from Sozin, that meant it had to do with trade in or around Omashu. He vaguely recalled the Fire Nation merchants had been disgruntled about the rising cost of importing goods from the western states of the Earth Kingdom, and guessed it had to do with that. Of course, Sozin said, raise the tariffs. He looked to his father. A familiar disappointment settled into Firelord Taiso's golden gaze. How many times must I explain this to you? If we raise the tariffs, the merchants will raise the prices even higher to cover those additional taxes, which means Fire Nationals will pay even more for the same goods. Then we produce those goods ourselves, Sozin tried. Most of those products cannot be grown or manufactured here, the Fire Lord pointed out, as he was explaining things to a small child. Hence the reason we import them. Sozin flushed with shame. So, yeah, he is not really into, this is an interesting thing here, like he's not actually really super into the everyday politics here. He does want to be more of an adventurer basically, and this stuff is just not what interests him. So it'll be interesting to see his growth here on this side of things. Father Taiso turned back to the stiff-bearded advisor and opened his mouth to speak his solution, but no words came out. Sozin tensed and held his breath. Everyone waited for the Fire Lord to say something, yet he continued to remain frozen, mouth open. People shifted and exchanged confused glances. The awkward silence stretched on several seconds. Sozin tried in vain to will his father to speak. This was not the first time the Fire Lord's mind suddenly wandered away, but these mental slips were becoming more frequent and more prolonged. While Taiso had so far managed to keep it from becoming public knowledge, the Fire Sages and the higher-ranking clans were beginning to quietly wonder whether Taiso was fit to lead, and whether the prince's blood might carry this same affliction. very interesting here. So they are going for the idea of these mental lapses. Is he going to be fit for duty anymore? This is also quite interesting as well, given that like Sozin will go on to live pretty long, like over 100. So that's kind of cool. And yeah, like, is this going to be a thing here that they're teasing the idea of, like, is this something that afflicts him as well? So yeah, like sicknesses, diseases is a bit of a theme in the book. We've had it like mentioned like a few times at this point. Is kind of interesting. So the setup almost seems to be that like we could almost like if we didn't already know that some of the details about this, you'd almost think that they're building up to Sozin will be Firelord at the end of this book. But there is still a bunch of years to go until that specifically happens, because like we do have the timing on that as well. So there's still a bit to go. So interesting. So they're not going crazy with this, but we'll see. Sozin clapped his hands together, breaking the spell of silence and drawing everyone's attention to himself. He smiled good-naturedly. Firelord Tyso has had a very long day. We'll reconvene in the morning. Reluctantly, the advisors bowed and backed out of the room. It wasn't until the last one had left that Tyso's mouth slowly closed and his eyes came back into focus. He turned to Sozin, the only other person left in the room, looking as lost as someone waking from a long slumber. It happened again, Father, Sozin said softly. Shame flickered in the Firelord's eyes for the briefest moment before his expression hardened. You're dismissed, he told his son. Sozin bowed and left, afraid of what this meant for his father, afraid of what it meant for his future. So, interesting. Very interesting. So yeah, the idea at this point is that Sozin doesn't actually seem like prepared to become Firelord if it was to happen very, very soon. His focus is sort of elsewhere. He seems to have, especially bringing the other book into play, like ambitions. Like he is frustrated about Tyso's focus on some things, but Tyso is actually a good politician, which is what Sozin doesn't like. His focus isn't on being a good politician, and so what causes him to change in that regard is the big thing. And then yeah, there's also the doubt about like, what if I go down that path? So I'm wondering if this might be like where he maybe focuses like his attention on specific parts of the knowledge he got from the library, because one of them was like long life, wasn't it? It was kind of like immortality. Like they did say that in the first book. That was one of the things he like quote unquote read about, though it was maybe teased as a little bit more of a kind of legendary thing. But either way, interesting. Next up, Out of Balance. So yeah, let me just check here. So we're on Out of Balance. How many more chapters do we actually get here? So we get this one, we get the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Okay. Okay, well, we'll at least go on for a little bit longer here. Out of Balance. After a few weeks of... a couple of weeks traveling at a leisurely pace, Roku and Gyatso reached the southwestern edge of the Northern Water Tribe territory. The air was frigid, the sky grey, and the sea frozen into a vast white field crossed by pressure ridges and dotted by low rocky mounds, which Roku guessed became islands during the summer melt. The jagged mountain range waited on the distant horizon, far on the other side of which lay Agna Kala. They hadn't seen a soul in days, and they were low on provisions, so they both perked up as soon as they spotted a collection of tiger seal hide tents clustered atop one of the rocky hills. But Roku frowned when he noticed how the tents were tattered, with several sagging or leaning askew. While the low ice wall that encircled the encampment was shoddy and crumbling, Lola didn't even bother slowing down. "Anybody home?" Gyatso called through cupped hands as they neared. The Arctic wind swallowed his words, and there was no movement in response. They were about to keep flying past when Roku noticed a faint curl of smoke rising from the encampment's sole ice structure. He pointed to it. "There." Gyatso squinted as he gathered the sky bison's reins. "Should we check it out?" "Why not?" Roku said. They were still days away from reaching Kuruk's Point, the southwesternmost coastal settlement that appeared on Northern Water Tribe maps. So, okay, from Kuruk's Point, the southwesternmost coastal settlement that appeared on Northern Water Tribe. Okay, so this is, we're talking about Northern Water Tribe territory, and Kuruk has a place named after him that's in the southwest of Water Tribe territory. Very cool, because again, the Water Tribe, this is where we actually do need quite a bit of world building on the Water Tribes, because it's very easy to get focused on the Southern Water Tribe is Wolf Cove and vague other stuff, and then the Northern Water Tribe is Agnakella and other stuff. So actually just hearing about like the name of another Water Tribe settlement is actually kind of cool, but that's interesting. And yeah, this might get into the idea, like maybe the chief we got mentioned before is the chief of this place, but it's not like high chieftain and the specific terminology and stuff like that. Okay. Lola dropped him at the base of the hill below the encampment, then flew off to forage. What she'd find, Roku didn't know. He had read and heard all about the harsh, unforgiving environment of the Northern Water Tribe in preparation for the next phase of his training. But to see it and feel it for himself was another thing entirely. It was the exact opposite of the Fire Nation's warm waters and tropical vegetation. Even the mountaintop air temples were only a short flight from lush forests and verdant valleys. He knew people had survived in the north for thousands of years. He had even learned to draw their strength from it, but how? So there is a thousands of years reference. It's still a little bit vague there, but it's like, hey, we're talking about a couple thousand years, at least. Again, we know what pre-Four Nations roughly is kind of alluding to, and it's just an interesting reference. Roku and Gyatso were wearing an extra layer of Air Nomad winter robes and had sky bison fur blankets wrapped around themselves. But still, Roku shivered as they trudged uphill through icy snow. He didn't even need to try firebending to know that the freezing temperatures would diminish his energy. Maybe he should have listened to Sister Disha and timed his trip for a spring arrival. The encampment seemed even more destitute up close. There was not a single buffalo yak, and nobody came out to greet them. The only sounds were the wind, their breathing, and the ice crunching beneath their boots. The only sign of life was that thin line of smoke. Roku led the way to the ice shelter from which it rose, and then pushed aside the door flap. "Flamey-o, cold man," Gyatso greeted as he poked his head around Roku. Or maybe it should be Snowy-o, Iceman. And he mumbled to himself, "Icy-o, snowman." So we're continuing this. That this is of course the old school lingo. This is where it comes from. Gyatso making it up, spreading it around the place. Roku narrowed his eyes at Gyatso, then turned his attention to those within. There were half-dozen tribespeople sitting atop caribou bear skins from around a small stone basin filled with burning oil. Everyone looked up except for a tall tribeswoman with long black hair sitting apart. So I guess this is Makituk, but we'll see. Though they do say she tends to be by herself, at least in her RPG description. We'll see. Recognized the hunger in their eyes, hoped that he brought something to eat. Unfortunately, he did not have much. "Greetings, travelers," said a large older tribeswoman with white hair loops. She scooted over and gestured for them to sit. "Come in from the cold before you freeze your skinny butts to death." "Thank you," Roku said. He and Gyatso entered. The air was warm, but stuffy and smoky. They unshouldered their satchels, lowered their hoods, and sat down. "I'm Avatar Roku, and this is Monk Gyatso." "Avatar, eh?" The old woman said as everyone around the fire eyed him with renewed interest, except for the person sitting alone, whose head remained down. Okay, so it probably is her. And we might be maybe dealing with that directly, kind of what her arc is going to be, I guess. Roku swept his hand outward, warmth surged as the stone lamp blazed brighter. Nice trick, the old woman said, but unless you brought more oil, the fire's only going to burn out faster now. Roku's face reddened, he rubbed the back of his neck. Sorry. Forgive my friend, Gyatso said. He means well, but he's still new at this helping people thing. Of course, the old woman said. Regardless, it's a pleasure to meet you both. She motioned for one of the tribesmen, a squat, grumpy-looking fellow with a sharp, pinched face like a hawk, to hand her something. The man hesitated. We don't have enough left to share, he whispered angrily. The old woman glared at him. Are none of our traditions sacred anymore? They are our guests. With a huff, the man handed over something that was the size of a fist, covered in cloth. The old woman unwrapped it to reveal a chunk of frozen meat. Turtle, seal, blubber, she said. So someone else handed her a half-moon-shaped ulu knife. She set the blubber down, cut it into small cubes, and offered the first two pieces to Roku and Gyatso. If you truly don't have enough, Roku started to say. Nonsense, she said. Don't you think it's an insult to deny your host food? Don't you know it's an insult to deny your host food in the Northern Water Tribe? Roku looked to Gyatso, who shrugged. The latter didn't normally eat meat, but Air Nomad beliefs permitted it when offered. Roku and Gyatso thanked her, took the small cubes, and popped them into their mouths. Well, the old woman asked, satisfied to have fulfilled her duty, what do you think? Chewy, Roku said as his teeth worked the rubbery piece of fat, but good. And fishy, Gyatso added. So that's a nice little detail there. She cut more and distributed them to the others. After Roku finished his piece, he opened his satchel and took out a pouch. Flaming fire flakes, he said, from the Fire Nation. They're a bit spicy, warned Gyatso. The others looked to the old woman eagerly. She nodded and Roku passed the pouch. As each took a handful, Roku examined the faces around the fire. They were a mixture of men with unkempt beards and women with facial tattoos. Their hair was black or grey or turning grey, and their skin was various shades of brown. A coughing fit overtook the old woman. You weren't lying, little guy, she told Gyatso through tears as her coughing turned to laughter. Those are spicy. The others tried the flakes for themselves, and soon nearly everyone was coughing and laughing, passing around water pouches. As the laughter passed and they finished eating, the old woman turned back to Roku. So, what's the Avatar doing all the way out here? Saving the world, I suppose? Roku smiled. Not yet. I'm on my way to begin my waterbending training in Agna Kel-A. The squat, hawk-faced man scoffed. The capital, he muttered. Of course. What's wrong with the capital? Roku asked. The man turned his head and spat. What isn't wrong with the capital? I don't know, Roku admitted. I've never been there before. The old woman glared at the hawk-faced man again. This is a conversation best left to our own community. He is the Avatar, is he not? The man said. Come to live among our people and learn our ways. She said nothing, so he continued. The appetite abroad for northern fish and skins and meat only grows with each passing year, and the trading companies don't care about taking more than the land offers, so long as it fattens their pockets. Chief Tigwa is glad to let them do it so long as trade flows, and his precious capital continues to grow. So the context there seems to definitely be that the current, I guess, high chief, overall water tribe chief, is Tigwa. So I'm guessing if we get to Agna Kel-A, we will get introduced to Skiri, I guess. But anyway, not only that, the old woman decided to chime in, but he's offered such high wages for waterbenders that few remain in the outskirts. Okay. That explained why this tribe was living mostly in tents instead of ice shelters, despite the fact that it was already winter. Why would he do that? Gyatso asked. Think about it. The hawk-faced man tapped his temple several times. A city that size, constructed almost entirely of ice. Who's building and maintaining it? Who's defending it? Who's working its tanneries and fisheries and docks and infirmaries? And then there are the illnesses, said a young tribeswoman with lavender eyes, speaking for the first time. Everyone's attention shifted to her. What illnesses? Roku asked. Take your pick, she said sadly. The more these traders move around the world, the more they spread sickness. My own village was wiped out a few years ago by the northern pox. I lost everyone I love in this world. I'm sorry to hear that, Gyatso said. Unfortunately, our story isn't unique, said the young woman. Roku was confused. Isn't there a remedy to northern pox? There is, she said, but Agnikela controls the supply. Since many of the ingredients are rare, we were only a small poor village, unable to afford even a few doses. Roku shifted, bothered by the blatant injustice. Chief Tigwa should have given it to you freely. The hawk-faced man scoffed again. Where's the capital's profit in that? Indignant, Gyatso asked, but where's the profit in letting the pox spread through the north? What if it reached the city? I'm certain they'd keep enough on hand just in case that should happen. It's only the surplus they're willing to part with for those who have enough coin. He's right, the young woman agreed, then dropped her eyes to the ground. The old woman sighed. I'm afraid the same thing is about to happen again. What do you mean? There's a new sickness in this region, one that affects animals, covers them in purple sores and turns them vicious. Even those that are normally docile or harmless go completely feral, mauling whoever they encounter. So that's the prologue of the book, of course. So there's that. When do you think Avatar Studios will make an announcement about a new project? This is the tricky thing here, is just like, I think we're probably in for a little bit of a rough end of the year / start of next year. When it comes to Avatar Studio stuff, I think we're not really going to hear too much officially until probably like April is maybe the earliest we might hear like something. But it seems like they're planning to wait until pretty much proper marketing time period to do the movie setup stuff with probably a trailer. I do think they probably have to reveal something before the trailer, which will be like 4-ish months before release. It's so difficult to call because they've given us news randomly when we haven't expected, and then when we have expected news, they haven't given us any. So it's all up in the air. But anyway, a few moons ago, my cousin Quarsok was killed by a turtle seal infected with the condition. Okay, so there's the direct reference to the opening. My nephew barely escaped with his life. A turtle seal? Gyatso asked in disbelief, clearly wondering if this was a joke. But the man nodded gravely. And besides the danger of animal attacks, the other creatures smell the infection and stay away. It's making hunting nearly impossible. And what if humans catch it too? The old woman asked. We sent word to Agnikela, but do you think they cared? Said the man. Nobody responded because everyone knew the answer. The man let out a heavy sigh. For thousands of years, our people moved with the seasons, listening to the land. We have always had encampments and settlements and trading outposts, some larger than others, but they were the limbs of our people, not the heart. Now Chief Tigwa seeks to strengthen the capital at the expense of the rest of the Northern Water Tribe, and everything is out of balance. Several grunted in agreement. Roku had heard about the increasing prosperity of Agnikela over the last few decades, but in the Fire Nation it was cited as an example of the benefits of growing trade between the nations. He had yet to consider or witness what was sacrificed on the altar of that growth. The man turned his icy gaze back to Roku. I'm surprised you even bothered to stop here. You said you're to start your waterbending training at the capital. Roku nodded. Then you too are here to take. He trains so he can serve, Gyatso said, coming to his friend's defense in a way that warmed Roku's heart. It's okay, Gyatso, Roku said, since getting defensive wouldn't accomplish anything. The man's concern was valid, even if the frustration was misdirected. I appreciate the perspective. The man stood. I only hope you're appreciative enough to help more than yourself while you're with us, Avatar. With that, he strode between Roku and Gyatso and walked out of the tent. So there's that. Okay. You'll have to forgive us, Avatar Roku, the old woman said. We'd be better hosts under different circumstances. Anyway, We may not have much, but we do have extra clothing left behind by those who abandoned us for the capital. You should be able to find something that fits. Our furs will be much warmer than those thin robes you're wearing now, and you're free to stay as long as you like before you continue your journey. Roku and Gyatso thanked the old woman, knowing it was an impossible offer. This small aging tribe didn't have enough to sustain themselves for much longer, let alone 2 young men and a sky bison. We could fly you to another community like Karuk's Point if you'd like, Roku offered. Thank you, but we wish to live as our ancestors always have, the old woman said, or die trying. Okay. And if I remember correctly, the first book kind of referenced like a city like this, with the idea that like aging population, the idea that like they're not actually going to kind of move to a different location, and the idea like that Roku is now sort of encountering something like that happening directly. It's a kind of cool like subtle setup or kind of reference to the first book. It's interesting. We have to help, right? Gyatso asked Roku later that night. They were lying on sleeping mats in one of the vacant tents that the small tribe had lent them for the night. A small, slow-burning fire crackled between them as wind whipped at the patchwork of tattered tiger seal hides that comprised the tent's walls. Roku rolled from his back onto his side and propped up his head on a fist. She didn't ask for help. It's not their way, Gyatso said, but it was implied. Roku thought of Lombok Island, of rushing in before he was ready, of trying to channel borrowed energy, of the lives that were lost as a direct result. When we reach the capital, we'll share what they've told us with Chief Tigwa. Gyatso sat up. You heard that man. They already did that, and the chief didn't care. I'll be better equipped to help people like them once I'm a fully realized avatar. Do you plan on doing nothing for the world for however many decades it takes to complete your training? Gyatso asked. It was a low blow. He knew Roku was insecure about his progress. And this is an interesting angle to take on this, because this is meant to be the standard approach to training the avatar, isn't it? But now they're kind of... I guess the timing maybe is not always the case, that it always is meant to be like 4 years. That was Roku's kind of method, which is more like the norm. But it just so happens, I guess, that it's kind of Roku's in a line where a lot of the avatars around him all have like crazy stories of like they were fully realized avatars as teenagers and stuff like that, and it comes across as if he's way behind, but there probably are a bunch of other avatars who did a lot of training. But the Gyatso point is very valid here, the idea of like, are you planning to do your entire training before doing anything as the avatar? That's also not the correct way to do it. Like there's a balance somewhere in the middle overall to find with this. So yeah, it's not going to take decades. So that tribesman was right. You are just here to take. You said yourself that I train so I can serve. Maybe I was wrong. Gyatso lay back down, rolled away from the fire, away from Roku. Roku returned to his back, closed his eyes, and took another deep breath. He wished Sister Disha was here to advise him on what to do, even though he knew the Ernon would direct him to look inward. But whenever he did that, Roku did not find some moral compass pointing that way. Instead, there was only the murk of indecision and uncertainty. So yeah, he doesn't know what approach to take. But yeah, it's looking like they're... I think every Water Tribe character is like, is this where they introduce Makituk? Is this where they introduce Makituk? But I guess she is in the kind of outskirts of Agnakella is where it's described that she is. So we're not there yet. So I guess we don't expect to see her just yet, is the idea. A clear path. Atka crept towards the Avatar's tent through the semi-darkness of a northern midnight in which the snow and ice always glowed an ethereal white. Okay, so this is Atka. This is the character who is acting weird about the illness in the prologue chapter, who, I don't know, maybe is behind it. I don't know what the situation is, but we'll see what happens here. She stepped lightly to reduce her footfalls to a whisper, then paused before the entrance to listen. It was quiet within, save for the soft flames of an oil lamp and the steady sound of breathing. She nudged aside the door flap until she could see the two sleeping young men. Her gaze slid past the bald airbender to the new avatar. He was on his side, fists softly clenched below his chin. His long black hair was down and fanned out behind his head. Despite his height and muscles, he looked like a little boy. Like her little brother when he'd wake from a nightmare, climb into her bed, and fall back asleep nestled against her, which would never happen again. Okay, so she's lost her brother. Atka took off her mitts and slipped one hand into her pocket, and wrapped her fingers around a small vial filled with a viscous metallic liquid. Okay, so we've got like some metal poisoning stuff going on here, so Korra Book 3 kind of antics here. I'm sure it's a different poison, but that's interesting, a metallic poison. It had taken her years of studying poison craft to create this recipe. As close as she was to perfecting it, the job wasn't finished yet, and she wasn't about to let the avatar stop her. By tinkering and trying different iterations on various animals, she had already learned to prepare the poison in different ways to manipulate its effects. She could turn it into a colourless, tasteless, odourless powder with which she could contaminate food or drink. So the search reference, this is what I guess the thing that was created by Ursa that she learned from her mother, it was, to create, that she gave to Ozai to take out Azulon. Now, is it the exact same thing? It was described in the exact same way. Colourless, tasteless, odourless, like kind of powder to put into something. But then like we're like metallic. It's kind of like the different angle on it, which is interesting. She could dilute it to delay the reaction. She could mix it with certain ingredients so the unchecked aggression and unnatural strength lasted a few hours instead of a few minutes before the subject died. So it is a sort of strength booster. That's interesting. Still, she hoped to figure out how to extend that to at least a couple of days, but there would be time for that. The task at hand only required the poison in its purest, most undiluted form. A few drops slipped between the avatar's lips would be enough to corrupt his energy within the time it took her to disappear. Then he would lose all control, destroying everything and everyone around him, until the poison ran its course and he perished a few minutes later. The wording on that is so interesting. The idea of like, he's going to drink this and it will corrupt his energy, which is like it would impact his chi, his spirit in some way. And I guess because he's the avatar, he would go into the avatar state temporarily, I guess, destroy everything around him. The avatar state, I guess, would drop off so the cycle doesn't end, and that's her plan, I guess. Pretty crazy, though, here. Just someone trying to poison the avatar. Obviously, I'm guessing here we're going to find out why her brother died, and it's going to tie into, like, she's trying to destroy this specific settlement, which were there. I think the discussion with the group of people from before gave you a kind of positive outlook on like the enemy is is Agna Kella, as the high ups there, not kind of respecting the rest of the tribe almost. Not that we need to take out the people here, but there's obviously something kind of going on here. That's interesting. At least that's what she theorized. She had yet to test it on any humans. What better human specimen to test it on than the Avatar, though? Akka visualized herself slipping into the tent as silently as a spirit, using her bending to quietly immobilize the airbender, kneeling at the Avatar's side, uncorking the vial, touching the glass rim to his lower lip, and then tilting. Simple enough. She pulled the door flap open wider and was about to enter when a sudden thought gave her pause. Was the Avatar the best person to test the poison on? What if he was too strong? What if the threat to his life triggered the powerful Avatar state? Would the poison still be able to corrupt his energy? Okay, so it's addressing what I just said. If his spirit was able to fight the effect and he ended her, it would all be for nothing. That was not a risk she was willing to take. Not yet, anyway. Atka drew the vial back, corked it, and sighed softly. But then a slow grin spread across her face as a new idea came to mind, like stumbling upon a clear path. The Avatar might not be the best person to test the poison on, but he might be the best person to test it against. She could shadow him and the Airbender as she continued trying to work out the final kinks. They would try their best to stop or cure the animals or people she infected, and their actions could give her insight into how best to alter the recipe. In such a way, she might be able to refine the poison until she crafted something truly unstoppable. Then it will be ready to unleash upon Agnakella and the rest of the world. Yes, that was the way forward, and she would begin this very night. Okay, that's kind of crazy. This character who just wants to, I guess, take revenge against the entire world by like creating this like unstoppable poison disease that just kind of spreads. Very, very interesting. And obviously the clear setup is backstory, motivation, why. The focus here is that she's just using this place as a test, and it's Agnakella, I guess, as her primary target, and why not the world? Interesting. And then, yeah, they did say that it was her brother, didn't it? That died, yeah, like her little brother when he'd wake from a nightmare, and that would never happen again. So yeah, it's clearly something to do with what happened to her brother, and she blames, I guess, Agnakella for it. So I think the obvious setup probably here is that the chief here, Tikwa, I'm guessing he gets killed by the poison. That they are presenting him as being a leader who is only focused on profits, and we know a few years later we have a new chief. I think it feels like we're building up to like one of the main victims of this is probably going to be the current chief. Maybe. We'll have to wait and see. But I like the idea of this kind of villain, of just like a kind of poison craft overall. That's a poisoner. That's a very interesting kind of idea there. Like just the concept of her like standing over them while she's asleep, kind of thinking about like, should I do it? Should I poison the Avatar? And then like, wait, no, Avatar state. Like she thinks it through more than Zahir and the Red Lotus do. I suppose that's the kind of funny thing in this. Is just like they were like, no, we can take the Avatar state. Go ahead with the poisoning. And she's like, I can't take the Avatar state. No poisoning. So clever. Definitely here. So I like the idea. I definitely like the idea. How much more do we have left? It's just, I think it's this and then like the very start of the next chapter, is it? Yeah, okay. So yeah, we have one chapter and a page. So let's just finish this off. Good company. Roku felt the low growl rumbling through the ice more than he heard it. Though where or what it was coming from, he couldn't say. It was night, and he was walking through a narrow passage between the tall, jagged walls of a twisting ice canyon. Overhead, the sky shimmered with the diaphanous green and purple northern spirit lights. Love that. There was someone ahead of him, half crouched in the stillness with a staff in hand. Did you hear that noise? Roku asked, assuming it was Gyatso before him. But a response came in a rough, deep voice that did not belong to the young air monk. For the last time, be quiet. With a twisting snap of his wrist, Roku brought a small flame into his palm so he could get a better look at this stranger. Who? The person swiftly whipped around to face Roku, pale blue eyes glaring. Put that out. Roku nearly gasped as he took in the sight of the barrel-chested man in dark blue furs with light brown skin, a chiseled jaw and animal teeth and claws strung around his thick neck and muscular wrists. It was not an airbender's staff he carried, but a spear. Avatar Karuk? Karuk slapped Roku on the side of the head. So, past life scene here. That's really, really cool. We'll see how this is. I wasn't expecting this at all. I was like, wait, is this the introduction of Makituk? I was literally thinking that. And then, oh no, it's actually Avatar Karuk. Okay. Roku's flame extinguished as he moved his hand to rub the spot Kyoshi's predecessor had just struck. Karuk spun back around, dropped back into a half crouch, and continued stalking through the icy canyon. Not knowing what else to do, Roku followed. They were hunting, apparently. At least Karuk was. Was this the spirit world? No. If it were, Roku wouldn't have been able to firebend even such a small flame as he had, which meant it must be a dream, a lucid one, given he had enough awareness for that realization. Though Roku had 1,001 questions, he kept his mouth shut lest he get smacked even harder. Instead, he continued quietly trailing Karuk as he prowled through the winding, icy maze. The water avatar took slow, careful steps, shifting his weight expertly from heel to toe so that he moved smoothly and silently. Though his spear was lowered, Roku had no doubt that the man could raise and hurl it with deadly accuracy in an instant. Karuk's every motion suggested the silent stealth of a lethal predator. The growling grew louder, nearer, more threatening. Roku's instincts were screaming at him to retreat, even as Karuk led them forward in search of the beast making the sound. Roku had no idea what it was, something large and ferocious surely, a polar bear dog perhaps, maybe a lion orca. Having encountered neither beyond scrolls and paintings, Roku had no idea what they sounded like. For all he knew, it might be an entirely different creature. Avatar Karuk stopped so abruptly, Roku almost bumped into him. They had come to a sharp turn in the icy passageway. Karuk leaned forward slowly and peered around the corner. Then he withdrew his head and faced Roku, eyes wide with fear. Except it wasn't his terrified face in front of Roku now. It was Gyatso's. "Wake up," the airbender cried. Roku's eyes flew open. He was back in the tent. The lamp had burned out, and it was so dark he could barely make out the shape of Gyatso's bald head hovering in front of him. "What?" Roku said, rubbing his face. "What was it? I was dreaming of Avatar Karuk, and..." A deafening roar cut him off, followed by a loud crash and a chorus of screaming and shouting. "Something's out there," Gyatso said, stating the obvious. Roku threw back his blanket, hurriedly pulling on his borrowed pelts, then shot out of the tent and into the frigid night, trailed by Gyatso. Roku brought a flame to life in his hand to light their way, and they dashed through the frosty snow, their breath puffing out in dense white clouds as they ran. It didn't take long to reach the source of the chaos. With harpoons drawn, 3 of the tribesmen stood surrounding a hulking, antlered figure down on all fours, a caribou bear. Except its brown fur was mottled with purple splotches, as if it had some strange form of mange. Behind the beast lay an unmoving body among the ruins of the wrecked tent. At the sound of Roku and Gyatso's approach, the snarling beast swung its antlered head around. Half of its face had been consumed by the purplish sores, and its eyes were as wild as they were vacant. Its lips curled back as it bared its razor-sharp teeth. Gyatso muttered. Roku shifted into a defensive stance, wishing he were still Karuk. "What's wrong with it?" "I think it has that sickness," Gyatso said. The beast roared, lowered its head, and charged, antlers first. The tribesmen hefted their harpoons. The weapons stuck into its back like quills, but did nothing to slow down the creature's advance. Roku and Gyatso dove apart, barely avoiding the beast's antlers, as it ploughed through the space where they'd been standing a moment before. Gyatso rolled back onto his feet. "Don't hurt it," he called to Roku. "I'm more worried about us," Roku said, returning to Gyatso's side. The caribou bear skidded to a stop in the snow, wheeled around, roared, and barreled forward again. Roku and Gyatso thrust open palms forward, pushing streams of air directly at the beast. The combined force should have been enough to send most anyone or anything sailing into the distance, but the creature dug its claws into the snow-covered ground and slid back only a few inches. Gathering its strength, it began to power forward as the gale tousled its fur and swept away the top layer of snow. Any other ideas? Roku asked, straining to sustain the air blast as the beast inched towards them. The caribou bear was only a dozen paces away now. Freeze it, Gyatso said. Don't forget, I'm on my way to begin my waterbending training. Oh right, Roku furrowed his brow. Maybe there's another way. The beast closed the distance and lunged forward, forcing them to dive apart again. Without missing a beat, they rolled to their feet and pushed air at the creature from opposite directions this time, creating a whirling trap that held it in place. I can't keep this up forever, Roku called through clenched teeth. Gyatso's face lit up with an idea. Firebending. You said not to hurt it. Then don't. Gyatso shifted his arms downward to direct his air at the ground, showering the beast with snow. It turned towards him and reared up within the white cloud, claws out. Now, the air nomad shouted. Roku understood. He released the air, clenched one hand in a loose fist, and pushed out a soft wall of flames. The snow that had enveloped the caribou bear melted, and in the next instant, Gyatso swung his arms around and wrapped the creature in a spiral of arctic air that flash froze the water before it could even settle. Encased in ice, the beast loomed over Gyatso mid-lunge, its massive paw only inches away from the batting the air nomad's head off his neck. Gyatso grinned at Roku. Ta-da. Okay, so that's a way to get some, I guess, water bending without doing water bending. It's kind of interesting. Look out, Roku called a moment before the creature broke free. Its enormous paw grazed the top of Gyatso's head as the air nomad ducked and slid between its legs, aided by a burst of air on his back. I think I need to hurt it, Roku said, lowering into an offensive firebending stance as the caribou bear spun around once more. But before it could take another step forward, ice sprouted up from the snow beneath the beast's feet, crackling as it climbed up the length of the caribou bear's body and then freezing it in a thick chunk of solid ice up to the neck. Okay, so a waterbender, I guess, has arrived. The creature's eyes darted wildly about as it snarled and bit at the air. This time the ice held. Gyatso turned to Roku, impressed. He patted Roku on the back, then turned with a flourish to the tribesmen cowering behind the remaining tents. Behold, Avatar Roku, master of 3 elements. That wasn't me. Then who was it? Me, came a soft-spoken voice from behind them. I guess this is Makitok. Will I finally be correct? Yes, I am. A soft-spoken voice behind them. It was a tall young tribeswoman with amethyst eyes set within an umber face, framed by a fur-lined hood. 2 thin, V-shaped white lines were tattooed on her forehead, and another single line of white ink ran from the center of her lower lip to the bottom of her chin. She hadn't been among those sitting at the fire last night. Roku would have remembered such a face. Then it hit him. She must have been the one sitting silently apart who kept her head down all evening. Ah, Gyatso said as the girl approached. Then thank you, whoever you are. Makitok, she said with a warm, broad smile. Thank you, Makitok, Roku echoed. You saved our lives. The young woman was about to say something else when someone cried out from the other side of the encampment. Avatar, please come quickly. Roku, Gyatso, and Makitok rushed over to find the old tribeswoman kneeling next to the hawk-faced man. He was lying back among the wreckage of one of the tents, propped up on his elbows. He was groaning, face contorted in agony, probably because his right arm was bent at an unnatural angle. Roku and Gyatso had helped splint broken arms before. It was a common enough injury among novice airbenders, but Makitok dropped to the man's side first. She lifted her hands and a line of snow rose from the ground. It melted into water and enveloped his injured arm. Roku's eyebrows shot up. Despite what the old woman had said last night, he had found not just a waterbender, but a healer. Makitok began to sway her hands back and forth, the motions fluid and hypnotic. Before long, the water began to glow as it snaked around the arm. Gradually, the bend in the arm straightened out and the man's pained expression melted away. Ta-da, she said, and winked at Gyatso before dropping her hands. The water dimmed and fell to the snow-covered ground with a muted splash. The man sighed with relief. Thank you. Makitok got up and walked back towards the caribou bear, which had fallen silent at some point. Roku followed after her. She stopped in front of the beast, crossed her arms over her chest, and sighed. It's dead. Sure enough, the creature was frozen in the exact same position it had been before, but now its head lolled to one side, its eyes were blank, and didn't appear to be breathing. Sadness overcame Roku at the loss of life. Did the ice kill it? The cold doesn't kill that quickly, Makituk said. Her eyes ran over the patches of purple sores. It was the infection. Have you encountered it before? No, she said simply. Do you think there's a cure? Maybe, but you need a living one to test any remedies. Roku shifted. Things could get even worse for the tribes on the outskirts if an illness like this continued to spread. So much of the Northern Water Tribe's way of life depended on animals that not even the capital would remain untouched. And what if it could be transmitted to humans like the old woman had speculated? Roku had longed for direction, and the universe sent an immense, snarling, sore-encrusted caribou bear and a waterbender. He turned to Makituk. My friend and I won't be going straight to Agnikela after all, but we could use help. We could use the help of someone who's familiar with the land, knows how to heal, and can flash freeze any infected feral animals that tried to tear off our heads again. Know anyone who fits that description? Makituk stared up at the caribou bear as she considered the offer. What's the pay? Good company, Roku said. The young waterbender looked him over, unimpressed. He was certain she was going to say no, but then she shrugged. I've got nothing better to do. So this is how we get our, I guess, Team Avatar teammate for this this book here. And then we have one page here. A cold and consuming fire. Have you something better to do? Asked Fire Lord Taiso, standing at the head of the table as Princess Zaysan sauntered into the room several minutes late, wearing loose, flowing robes and without her crown. Actually, Father, she said as she took the seat across from Sozin, I have several more appealing invitations for this evening. She made a face at her brother and nodded in greeting to their mother, Lady Haze, who was at the opposite end from the Fire Lord. She was still the favourite, despite her burgeoning rebelliousness. So the Fire Lord merely sighed at his daughter's impertinence and wandered over close to the door she'd left open. Sozin's jaw tightened. If he had entered in such a manner, he would have been commanded to try again. We have an important matter to discuss, Taiso said. He returned to his place at the head of the table, but remained standing. Let's get right to it. Zaysan leaned back. Sozin sat up straighter. It was time then. They were finally going to address the elephant koi in the room. Sozin had already suspected as much, given that Taiso had sent all the servants and guards away so that nobody was within earshot. But even so, his heart began to race. And so this is where the preview comes to an end. But that's a really decent preview. Like, that's a pretty decent chunk of the book there. So like that was like what, 8+ chapters or something like that, and like the overall book's probably going to have like maybe 50 something at most. We'll see. Now obviously I guess this is going to address his health and what the succession plan is, and to a certain degree I guess the idea here is it going to be some sort of a thing where he like almost sets up Zaysan to be like, I've kind of chosen you to be my successor, and then Sozin's going to get really annoyed about that, or what. There's a bunch of stuff that's definitely going to be happening here, but I really like what they're doing here, because it is tying into the events of the previous book, but like it's not directly like attached to it. Like you can definitely tell there's been a gap of time between the last one. The fact that we have Ta Min point of views, the fact that we have Sozin point of views as well. We're diving into some Water Tribe stuff, Fire Nation politics stuff. We still have Roku, we still have Gyatso, Makituk as well. This is all very, very interesting to see what exactly happens here. And then we still have, of course, I guess maybe for later on in the book, have to address the whole Fire and Air Center of Learning and probably set that sort of stuff up. Yeah, very, very cool. First time Zaysan has had a line, I think. Pretty much, her Legends RPG page has like a quote kind of, I think, attributed to her, but like, yeah, this is her first like effective, like, proper line of dialogue in, I think, in a piece of content. So that's interesting. So yeah, family meeting. Very interesting to see what's going on here. And then we have our team avatar here. Yeah, I'm guessing this has maybe spoiled some outlets' preview. Because the books have always tended to have some sort of an initial, like, some place gets the reveal. So some place is going to announce they have an exclusive reveal of a chapter, and we're already going to have read it, which is a little bit unfortunate, but we get a pretty substantial preview here for the book, and I think it's looking pretty good so far. I like the fact that they've already done a little bit of Karuk setup. Like, that's one I probably want to go back and maybe analyze that one a little bit more, what they were kind of going for there. The villain seems actually like super interesting with regards to just the kind of stealth, secret, like, how does she eventually become like uncovered, and then what do we do, what's her overall goal. There's a lot of stuff overall that I do like here. And then, like, Taiso actually, just from these first few pages, feels like a bit more interesting of a character than maybe some of the presentation from the first book. Not that it was bad, it's just there's more going on here with Taiso that I actually quite like. So yeah, the only concern is just that, like, this book does look like it's going to be the shortest book that we have so far, and it feels like we were just given like about a third of the book here almost. It's probably not quite that much, but it's probably around a quarter, honestly. But we'll see there. Mostly, definitely one, like, I need to read a lot of this again to kind of fully take it in. In my own time, look up some stuff from the previous books, see what some of the references are and stuff like that. I think this is good. The only maybe slight frustration is that, like, it's still basically 2 full months until it's out. We're going to be waiting a while, and the release date, December 30th, is a bit of a weird one, certainly. It's going to be a bit awkward where it's positioned, but there's not going to be a lot happening in the first half of the year, so a lot of discussion of this book in January, I guess, is going to be the focus. I'll probably do some sort of a video that's more of like, hey, we just read the whole thing here. I'll probably do some sort of an overview style video that's not like crazy long at some point over the next few days, once I've properly assessed everything here. And then we can't forget, we do still have Light It Up coming out soon. That should be fun. We'll get some Zito era content there. And then, of course, Avatar Magic the Gathering, I think, is going to be the I think it already is the, like, merchandise highlight of the year. And just the amount of new art that we're getting out of it is just incredible already. And it's going to be even more exciting when, like, the stuff is actually out and we can start opening packs and stuff like that. Yeah. So actually, like, it's going to be a pretty packed, I think, rest of the year. It's just, I think, probably February, March, April, May next year. That might be the tricky section of the year. But even then, if they announce the comics for the right time, we might be in a good position. And then, of course, the next novels as well. We still need to get the novel reveals, sort everything out. Oh yeah, we have the search bar. Do we have this? I don't know. We'll go on. We'll do it. We'll leave it there. I don't want to go into spoilers. I think we got a huge chunk of content from this. So I think we'll just leave it there. Wrap up the video in that way, and just kind of go on from here. So yeah, it's getting pretty late for me as well. It's nearly 1 o'clock, so there's that to consider also. But yeah, let me know in the comments of this video. I guess it'll be for the VOD, what you think about it. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. Really enjoyed this. Excited for the book. Let me know what you think. But yeah, gonna wrap up the stream there with just, yeah, thanks for watching, everyone, and bye.